The opacity advantage. Walk into any room and watch the scanning begin. A smile gets parsed for sincerity, a long pause for anger or weakness or calculation. We're all running surveillance on each other's faces, tone, and timing, hunting for clues about what someone wants, whether they're safe, what they might do next. The person who stays slightly blurry wins, not mysteriously blurry, not performatively guarded, just strategically vague. You don't hide yourself, you simply don't narrate yourself. The strange power of opacity is that the human brain abhors a vacuum. When someone cannot read you clearly, they fill the space with their own fears, hopes, and assumptions. And those assumptions become the story they believe about you. A quiet person seems wise. A calm person seems in control. A non-committal answer starts to feel like it might go your way. Meanwhile, the person bleeding their thoughts all over the table, the one who explains their reasoning, their hurt, their intentions, their doubts, they get sorted into a box immediately, knowable, categorized, easier to dismiss or predict or use. This isn't about being cold or dishonest. It's about the weight of transparency. When you tell people how you feel, when you telegraph your needs or vulnerabilities, you hand them a detailed map of your pressure points. They can love you with that map or weaponize it. The truly unreadable people in your life aren't the ones scheming. They're the ones who learned that the less you explain yourself, the less you can be nailed down, predicted, or turned against you. They've discovered that being slightly unknowable isn't lonely, it's sovereign. And that sovereignty comes not from withholding love, but from refusing to perform your interiority for an audience that was never required to understand it. Why being readable is expensive. Walk into any room where someone has decided to be completely honest about what they feel, and you'll watch the temperature drop like someone opened a door to winter. A colleague says, "I'm actually exhausted and frustrated," instead of smiling through the meeting. A partner admits they're hurt instead of pretending everything's fine. A friend tells you they're struggling instead of keeping up the cheerful mask. And suddenly they're the problem. They're too much, or negative, or difficult to be around. The person who reads as transparent, who lets their internal weather show on their face, pays a tax that the mysteriously composed person never will. Because readability is a liability in a world built on assumption. When you're opaque, people fill the silence with projections of what they want you to be. They imagine competence where there's actually doubt. They assume confidence where there's just a blank face. They project strength onto your stillness. But the moment you become legible, the moment someone can actually see the machinery running underneath, you lose that currency of mystery. You become categorizable, knowable, easier to dismiss or manipulate or discount. So people train themselves early, flatten the tell, master the neutral expression, keep the interior locked down, because vulnerability reads as weakness, and weakness reads as incompetence, and incompetence reads as liability. The person who never shows their hand controls the narrative about who they are. The person who does, doesn't. That's not a flaw in human perception. That's the design. And once you see it, you understand why the most powerful people in the room are often the ones you can't quite read. Baseline flattening. Most people think manipulation gets easier when you're loud or obvious about it. Wrong. The real chess move is learning to be so consistently neutral that your shifts go unnoticed. You walk into a room and you are the same temperature every single time. No sparkle, no frost, no tells. This is baseline flattening. And it's the opposite of what they teach you in body language seminars. Here's how it works. If you show up angry one day and cheerful the next, people calibrate to you. They learn your scale. They know when you're faking, when you're tired, when you're hunting. But if you're the same person at every interaction measured, measured, measured. They have nothing to recalibrate against. No contrast means no data. When you finally do shift, it reads as neutral information instead of emotion. A small smile becomes a reward. A pause becomes a threat. A single raised eyebrow becomes prophecy. People unconsciously use baseline deviation to spot insincerity. Watch someone's genuine joy versus their polite thank you at a party. The differences are tiny, but they're there. A readable person leaks. They warm or cool, depending on context. And that variance is how others know what they actually think. But flatten yourself, become the same person to everyone, always. You become an empty vessel. Others start projecting onto you because they have nothing solid to push against. The catch: this takes discipline. Most people are too sloppy, too reactive, too human. But if you're patient enough to become boring, truly, reliably, boringly consistent, you stop being legible. You become a mirror. And mirrors don't give away secrets. Tell inventory mapping. You know that feeling when someone asks what you're feeling and you freeze, not because you don't know, but because the truth is too messy to untangle in real time. That moment of silence is where tell inventory mapping lives. It's the gap between what's actually happening inside you and what you're willing to let surface in conversation. Smart people who know psychology, manipulators, salespeople, even the sharpest friends, they've learned to notice this gap. They watch it like a crack in your armor. Tell inventory mapping is the practice of cataloging every small leak. The way your jaw tightens when money comes up, how your eyes dart left when someone asks about your ex, the exact pitch your voice hits when you're lying about being fine, the slight flush across your neck when you're ashamed, the way you lean away when trust is broken. These aren't random ticks. They're data points. And if you've never mapped your own tells, someone else absolutely will. The person across from you is already building a profile without your permission. They're learning which topics make you defensive, which questions make you performative, which silences mean you're about to shut down. The real trick isn't hiding your tells. That makes you look brittle and controlled, which is its own tell. The move is knowing them first. Sit with yourself for 1 week and notice. When do you deflect with humor? When do you go quiet? When do you suddenly talk faster? When does your breathing shift? Map your inventory and you stop being readable in the way that matters. You become someone who knows exactly what you're showing and why. Emotional leak audit. You walk into a room and someone immediately clocks your jaw, tight, clenched, broadcasting something you didn't mean to say out loud. Your body just leaked it anyway. This is the chasm between what you think you're showing the world and what you're actually transmitting, and it's where most people crumble when they're trying to stay unreadable. Your face, your hands, your breathing, the tiny hitch in your voice when someone mentions a certain name, the way your shoulders creep up toward your ears. These are all emergency exits for emotion you swear you're containing. Most people believe unreadable means becoming a perfect poker face, which takes years of practice and honestly looks so hard that it registers as suspicious the moment anyone looks closely. The real move is simpler. Notice your own leaks before anyone else does. Spend a week just watching yourself in real conversations. When do your eyes narrow? When does your voice climb half an octave without permission? When do you touch your neck, cross your arms, or grip your hands together? You likely have 3 or 4 tells you repeat in predictable moments, usually when threatened, embarrassed, or when you're lying through your teeth. Once you map that pattern, you can choose. Live with it or swap it for something quieter. Try this. Record yourself talking about something mildly stressful and play it back with the sound off. You'll see micro expressions and gestures your conscious mind never caught. The real power isn't in becoming unreadable to others, it's in being readable to yourself first, so you control what you leak and when. The neutral face default. Watch someone's face the moment they realize you're watching them. That tight little reset. Their expression goes flat, not because they're trying to hide something necessarily, but because the default human state when you remove intention is something closer to a mask than a window. We think of neutral faces as blank, but they're not. They're a statement. I am here. I am present, but you don't get to know what's moving underneath. Most people live in this default for enormous stretches of the day, at work, on the bus, walking into a room where they don't know anyone. The face locks, the eyes go slightly distant. It's not dishonesty, it's self-protection on autopilot. The trick, the one that makes you hard to read, is leaning into this default so naturally that it never looks like a choice. Someone trying too hard to seem calm usually tenses their jaw or holds their shoulders too still. A person who has genuinely defaulted to neutral, they look almost bored, unremarkable. You don't think about them twice. They move through the room like a ghost with excellent posture. The real game is that people want to know what you're feeling, and a genuine neutral face. Not an anxious, blank stare, but actual relaxed neutrality makes them desperate to decode you. They'll talk more, reveal more, keep searching your face for permission or signs or anything to grab onto. You become a mirror they can't quite see themselves in. That's the power of the default. It costs nothing to hold, and it extracts endless information from everyone around you. Micro-expression suppression. Your face knows things your mouth hasn't decided to say yet. You hear that your partner is fine, totally fine, but for about 120 milliseconds, their jaw tightens and their eye pulls down. That flash of hurt or anger or betrayal, gone before they finish the word fine. That blink is a micro-expression, and most of us leak them constantly without realizing it. The weird part is, some people train themselves not to. They've learned the cost of transparency, so they build a dam between what they feel and what their face broadcasts. A childhood where anger meant danger. A job where vulnerability costs you respect. A relationship where being read became a liability. Over time, their face becomes a neutral zone, harder to read than a locked door. But here's the catch that most people miss. Suppressing micro-expressions actually creates a different tell. It's not that they suddenly become blank, it's that the blankness itself becomes too perfect, too controlled. The slight asymmetry in a real smile vanishes. The natural eye crinkle disappears. Your nervous system picks up on that stillness, even if you can't name it. You feel like something is off. You sense they're managing their face rather than living in it. The most unreadable people aren't the ones with the best poker faces. They're the ones who learned early that visibility was dangerous. And once you know what to look for, that learned blankness becomes its own confession. It tells you someone learned not to trust the world with their real reactions, which is information worth having. Blink rate discipline. Watch someone in a lie and you might catch it. Not in their words, but in how their eyes move. They blink faster or slower. The rhythm breaks. Your nervous system reads it like a flaw in a song, even if your conscious mind doesn't hear it yet. But here's the move that flips the script. If you can control your blink, you control what people think they're seeing. Your baseline blink rate sits around 17 times per minute when you're relaxed and telling the truth. Stress, deception, intense focus, they all change that number. High cognitive load speeds blinking up. Deliberate calm slows it down. People subconsciously expect to see that rhythm. When it vanishes, they sense something is off. When it stays steady, even under pressure, you read as controlled, confident, unbothered. The practical version? If you're in a conversation where you need to seem unfazed, practice holding a steady, natural blink rate. Not staring, that's its own red flag. Not artificial slowness, just the rhythm you'd have if you were genuinely at ease. Practice it until it feels native. The stranger part, once you're aware of your own blink pattern, you stop being as readable. Awareness becomes discipline. Your eyes become a tool instead of a leak. People who master this rarely realize they're doing it. It becomes automatic, like the way a poker player learns to hold their body still. The tells vanish not because you're hiding anything, but because you're no longer broadcasting your internal state to anyone paying attention. That's the difference between a face and a mask. Gaze anchoring. Walk into a room where someone has just glanced away from you, where their eyes land next. That patch of wall, that person across the room, that exit sign becomes your whole story about what they think of you. You weren't watching the actual gaze. You were reading the landing zone. That's gaze anchoring in its most naked form. Your brain treats the direction someone's eyes settle as evidence of their internal priority. They looked at the door. They want to leave. They looked at their phone. You're boring. They looked at someone prettier. You've already lost. None of that might be true. Maybe they're thinking about dinner. Maybe their neck hurts. Maybe they're processing what you said and their eyes just wandered. But your nervous system doesn't care about maybes. It locks onto that anchor point and builds a whole architecture of feeling around it. The trick people use this for is simple. If you want someone to think you're interested, calm, or dominant, anchor your gaze deliberately. Hold it on their face a half second longer than comfortable. Let it drop to their mouth, then back to their eyes. That micro pattern reads as confidence and presence. If you want to seem uncertain or subordinate, let your eyes flee first. Look away before they do. Anchor to the ground, their shoes, anywhere but their face. What's dark about this is that it works. They will believe the gay story you tell with your eyes far more than they'll believe your actual words. Your eyes are the lie detector people trust most, even though they're reading your eye movements, not your truth. Breath as tell. A cop once told me that the moment someone realizes they're caught in a lie, their breathing changes before their face does. You could be staring straight ahead, voice steady, words flowing, and then the air in your chest gets shallower. It's involuntary, a split-second betrayal your nervous system can't hide. Most people never notice because we're trained to watch eyes and mouths, not ribs. But if you're paying attention, breath is a window that stays open when all the shutters close. Think about the last time you were genuinely nervous. Not worried, nervous. Your breathing tightened, didn't it? That tightness is what happens when your body braces for threat, real or imagined. A person who is lying is experiencing a mild form of that same activation. Their amygdala fires. Their body knows something is wrong even if their conscious mind is rehearsed and smooth. Here's what matters. You don't need to confront them or say a thing. Just notice. Notice when someone's breathing deepens after you ask a direct question. Notice when a story that should flow smoothly comes with halting breaths, a pause, then suddenly speeds up again. Those moments tell you they're working, manufacturing, not thinking. The breath never lies because it's not smart enough to. It only reacts. If you want to stay unreadable yourself, notice your own breath first. That's the real trick. Conscious breathing kills tells because you've already caught yourself before anyone else can. Before your next difficult conversation, feel where your breath sits, own it, control it. Suddenly, you become the one with the closed shutters, the one whose body gives away nothing. Voice floor stability. Listen to almost any tense conversation and you'll catch the moment someone loses. Their voice climbs. It gets tighter, faster, a little desperate at the edges. Meanwhile, the person with the lowest, most measured voice in the room hasn't moved, still calm, still anchored, still sounding like they own the space. That's voice floor stability, and it's how your nervous system betrays you the moment pressure lands. When cortisol floods your body, your vocal cords tense, your pitch rises, your tempo quickens, you sound like you're pleading for permission to speak. The stable voice stays down, stays slow, stays certain. It broadcasts safety and control to everyone listening, whether or not any of it is true. Here's where it gets dangerous. You can learn this, not perfectly, but well enough to fool most people. Someone who masters staying low, who breathes from their belly instead of their chest, who intentionally slows their speech when panic wants to rush them, will sound credible even while lying. Interrogators know this. Therapists know this. Manipulators know this intimately. A person whose baseline doesn't shift when challenged reads as unshakable. A person who wavers reads as caught. In a negotiation, a courtroom, a relationship argument, your voice floor is constantly broadcasting whether you believe yourself. And if you don't sound like you believe you, no one else will either. The trap is that your body knows the difference even when your audience doesn't. That tremor, that speed, that climb, they're not optional. They're automatic. Pay attention next time you feel nervous. Notice where your voice goes. That answer tells you exactly how much ground you've already surrendered before you even begin to speak. Reaction latency control. Watch what happens when someone insults you and you don't flinch for 3 full seconds. Their confidence cracks a little. They start rewinding the moment in their head, wondering if they landed the hit they intended. That pause becomes proof that you're unshakable, and now they're spinning. The gap between stimulus and response is where all your power lives, and most people have no idea they're even negotiating it. Your natural instinct is to react fast, snap back, defend, prove you weren't hurt. Fast reactions feel like honesty, they feel transparent, but that's exactly what makes you readable. When you react immediately, you're running on emotion and old wiring, not thinking, just flinching. The people watching know exactly what they hit because you showed them instantly. Your face, your tone, your words broadcast the wound. Introduce even a single breath, a real, conscious pause before you respond, and something shifts in the room. You've moved from automatic to intentional. You've chosen your response instead of having it chosen for you by your amygdala. This isn't manipulation, it's sovereignty over your own nervous system. A 2-second delay before answering a loaded question. A moment of stillness when someone expects you to defend yourself or crumble. That's when people realize they can't read you anymore because you're not operating from the place they predicted. You're no longer a puppet on visible strings. Start small. Next time someone provokes you, count 1 real breath before you speak. Feel how different that moment tastes, how much room opens up inside you. That control is addictive because it's genuine. Once you own it, you stop being transparent, and they start wondering what you're hiding. Pause as armor. Someone leans across the table and asks you something sharp, a criticism, a test, a question that lands wrong. Your body temperature rises, words crowd your mouth, and here's where most people lose. They speak, They defend, explain, justify, over-explain. The other person watches every desperate word and learns exactly what buttons work, what wounds are still bleeding, how far they can push before you crack. You just handed them your instruction manual. But what if you didn't? What if instead of filling the silence, you became the silence? A pause isn't passivity. It's the opposite. It's the moment you take back complete control. When you pause, actually pause, not the fake kind where you're already formulating your comeback. 3 things happen at once. First, you stop leaking information. Every rushed word tells a story. I'm afraid. I'm hurt. I need this person to think well of me. Silence says nothing. It's unreadable. The other person gets 0 ammunition. Second, their nervous system gets confused. They threw the punch and hit air. That empty space makes them uncomfortable, so they fill it. They explain themselves, soften, reveal more, back down, or dig in so hard they expose their own motives. You learn who they really are while staying invisible. Third, you get back into your body instead of being trapped in reactive panic. Clarity returns, your hands stop shaking, your breath steadies, and in that clarity, you choose whether to speak at all, whether to leave, or whether to stay and say something that actually lands. The pause is the move that separates people who get played from people who play the game. Silence, tolerance, training. Watch what happens the moment a conversation dies. 2 people finish talking, the room goes quiet, and within seconds, someone cracks a joke, pivots to a new topic, or pulls out their phone like it's a lifeline. Most people will say almost anything to fill dead air because silence feels broken, something that needs urgent fixing. Your nervous system reads quiet as a threat, and the reflex to patch it kicks in fast. But here's what separates the genuinely opaque from everyone else. People who sit comfortably in silence have a form of power that's almost magnetic, and it costs nothing to build. When you learn to tolerate quiet without scrambling, you flip the dynamic entirely. They'll talk more, offer detail they weren't planning to give, backtrack and requalify, add unprompted explanations, all because they're trying to ease a tension you've already learned to carry without flinching. Someone who doesn't fill silence reads as secure, maybe even a little dangerous. They seem like they know something you don't. Start with something simple. In your next conversation, after someone finishes speaking, pause for 3 full seconds before you respond. Don't rush. Don't nod or make encouragement sounds. Just wait. Notice how often they'll add something unplanned, as if the silence is pulling words out of them. Watch them lean forward slightly, genuinely uncomfortable. Over weeks, this rewires 2 things at once: your own anxiety around dead air and how others perceive your baseline confidence. The edge isn't in being louder or faster. It's in being the one person in the room who isn't desperately trying to prove they're still there, outlasting the pause. There's a moment in every negotiation, confession, or argument when one person goes silent. Not a natural pause, but a held one. The kind where you feel the weight of unsaid words pressing against the room. Most people crack first. They apologize, explain, fill the void with noise because the pressure is unbearable. But whoever can sit in that silence longest wins before the other person even speaks again. Silence is a tool most of us have never been trained to use. When someone asks you a hard question and waits, your body screams at you to rush, to prove yourself, to smooth the discomfort with words. The person who stays still instead, who lets the silence stretch without flinching, without justifying, without softening their edges, suddenly appears unshakable, composed, untouchable. The moment flips. The other person becomes desperate to understand you, to fill the gap, to decode your calmness. They stop pushing and start leaning toward you. You've moved from reactive to the still point everything else orbits around. The trick isn't coldness or cruelty. It's developing comfort with being uncomfortable, learning to sit with your own anxiety instead of exporting it through words, understanding that your silence doesn't need an apology attached. Next time someone pushes you with a loaded question and then pauses, try holding for just 5 seconds longer than feels natural. Notice how people lean in. That silence isn't empty. It's full of power, and it belongs to whoever refuses to break first. Verbal minimalism. Watch what happens in a room when someone stops explaining themselves, not coldly, just matter-of-factly. They give you a fact, then they stop. No softening. No, I know it's weird, but no filler to make you comfortable with their choice. Most people can't do this. We're trained to justify, to offer context, to smooth the edges so nobody feels confused or hurt. But here's what's actually happening in that social reflex. You're telegraphing uncertainty. Every extra sentence is a bell ringing that says, I'm not sure you'll accept this, so let me keep talking until you do. The person who speaks less doesn't leave gaps that way. They say what they mean and let it land. No apology attached, no nervous laughter, no hedging. That quietness creates a weird gravity. People start filling the silence with their own thoughts, projecting confidence onto you because you're not frantically reassuring them. You become harder to read precisely because there's less noise. They can't find the cracks in your certainty. A dating partner who says, I'm busy tonight, and stops there feels more solid than one who says, I'm sorry, I'm so busy tonight, rain check. Same meaning, different weight. The minimalist version sounds like choice. The explanation sounds like apology. That gap is where trust and a mystery live. If you want to be harder to read, starve your sentences. Let people interpret the silence. Stop padding the air around your words with apologies and context nobody asked for. It's not rude, it's just clean. And clean power is the kind people can't quite figure out. Scarcity of explanation. Watch what happens when you don't finish a sentence. Someone cuts you off mid-thought, and suddenly that unspoken part becomes the most interesting part. Their brain fills the gap with whatever feels most urgent or true to them. That is scarcity of explanation at work, and it's one of the most reliable ways to make yourself unforgettable while staying maddeningly hard to pin down. The human mind abhors an empty frame. Leave something unresolved in a conversation, and they will carry it with them. Think about it. Guess at what you meant. That guess, their own construction, will feel more real to them than any answer you could have given. This is why the most magnetic people in rooms don't overclarify. They drop a detail and let silence do the work. They tell a story that ends too soon, or they answer a direct question with something sideways, leaving you slightly off balance and hungry for more. You cannot read them because they have not given you the full text. And because they have not, you are reading yourself instead, projecting your own assumptions onto the blank space. That projection feels like knowing them. It is not. It is you inside the room with them, and they are still outside it, watching. The paradox cuts clean. The more you explain yourself, the more predictable you become. Staying slightly unclear makes you harder to dismiss, easier to remember, and impossible to fully read. Say less. Let them finish the thought. The person who speaks the least in a room often owns it. Over-explaining as confession. You know that moment when someone tells you they're fine, then immediately adds 5 more sentences explaining exactly why they're fine? That avalanche of detail isn't reassurance. It's a leak. When people feel genuinely secure about something, they don't need to build the case. They just state it and move on. But when doubt lives underneath, the mouth keeps working, trying to plug the hole, and every extra sentence is a brick they're laying to hide what they already think you suspect. A person comfortable with their decision doesn't narrate it. Someone defensive does. The over-explain is basically a signed confession that something doesn't feel solid on the inside. Watch this in action. Someone cancels plans and says, "I can't make it." Full stop. That's a person at peace with their choice. But when they add, "I'm really sorry, it's just that I have so much on my plate and I've been exhausted and honestly, I didn't sleep well and my back has been killing me and you know how it is," you're watching someone convince themselves, not you. They're hoping that if they build enough reason scaffolding, the guilt or the lie will disappear. It won't. The more someone defends a choice, a story, or their character, the more you know they're defending it from their own doubt first. This is the real read. Listen for the volume of explanation relative to the size of the statement. That gap between what was asked and what was answered, that space where words are piling up like sandbags against rising water, that's where the actual information lives. People don't over-explain what they actually believe. The single reason rule: someone hands you one clean reason for why they did something, and you stop there. That's where the reading ends, and that's where you lose the thread. Human behavior is never singular. It's a stack of forces, some conscious and most buried, all pushing the same direction. When someone stays in a bad relationship, you frame it as love. When they quit without warning, you call it stress. When they snap at you, you assume it's what you said. Maybe all of those, but never only. Your brain collapses the whole tangle into a single story because a single story is easier to hold than a contradiction, and contradictions feel dangerous. Here's how the rule works. People will always hand you the most socially acceptable or logically clean explanation first, and they will believe it while saying it. They are not lying to you. They are lying to themselves first, and you are getting the rehearsed version. A single reason sounds more believable than a messy cluster of competing motives, so you take it and stop asking. But if you want to actually read someone, to see what is driving them beneath the surface, you have to sit with the discomfort of multiple truths existing at once. Someone can love you and resent you. They can want to stay and want to leave. They can fear abandonment and crave escape simultaneously. The people who read others best are the ones who learned to stop hunting for the one true reason and started looking for the tangle instead. The beautiful, contradictory mess underneath every human choice, never justifying twice. Someone questions your choice, and you can feel the doubt in the air, sharp and real. Your instinct fires. Explain, defend, make them understand. But stop and watch what happens next, because if you explain twice, something flips inside the room. You've just told both of you that the first explanation didn't work, that uncertainty lives in the gap between the two versions. The moment you re-justify, you shift from statement to defense, and anyone paying attention knows defense is the posture of the weak. Think back to the last time you watched someone double down on their reasoning in front of you. Did you trust them more? No. You trusted them less. Every added word was a brick in the wall between you and belief. This is the strange, quiet power that unreliable people sometimes hold. They don't scramble to convince you. They say it once, they let it breathe, they move on. If the answer was solid, a second one was unnecessary. If it wasn't, no amount of repetition will build it back. Repetition doesn't signal confidence. It signals fear, and your brain reads that faster than you can speak the words. So the next time someone interrogates your reasoning, your choice, your move, answer once and answer with clarity. Then stop. Sit in the silence. Let it settle. People interpret that calmness as certainty, and certainty, whether you've earned it or performed it, is the currency that makes you impossible to dismiss. The ones who never have to prove themselves again are the ones who learned early. Speak doubt twice, and you've confirmed it. The unreadable yes. You ask someone a direct question and they say yes. Their mouth says yes, but their shoulders stay tight. Their eyes glance away, and there's a half-second lag before the word comes out. That delay, that micro-hesitation, it's not a lie. It's a yes that comes with an invisible asterisk. The person has agreed but not consented. Agreement is a transaction. Consent is a feeling. Most people confuse them because we train ourselves to say yes, even when every nerve in our body is screaming something else. A boss asks if you can handle extra work. A partner asks if you're okay with their plan. A family member asks if you want to come to the event. You say yes because saying no feels too expensive. It might cost you approval, safety, or peace, but that yes is now a debt. You're going to resent the work, the plan, the event. You're going to find ways to sabotage it or withdraw because you never actually wanted it. The other person gets to feel like they did nothing wrong. They asked, "You said yes? So what's your problem?" Here's what cuts deepest. The unreadable yes stays invisible to the asker unless they're actively hunting for it. Most people aren't. They're relieved to get what they wanted and they move on. But if you're learning to stay unreadable, you need to flip the script. You need to know when someone's yes is real and when it's just survival wearing a smile. The people who stay ahead are the ones who learn to hear the asterisk before the resentment starts. Strategic ambiguity. You felt this without naming it. Someone gives you an answer that technically answers your question, except you still have no idea where they actually stand. They agreed to your plan, but their tone left room for doubt. They said they're fine with the breakup, but fine can mean relief, resignation, or a threat. That fog isn't accidental. It's one of the sharpest moves in human negotiation, and you'll spot it everywhere once you start looking, in boardrooms and text chains and families deciding who's really upset with whom. Strategic ambiguity is the art of saying something true while leaving the listener to fill in the emotional blanks. It buys you time, safety, and control all at once. If you're vague enough, people project their own hopes onto your words, which means they're doing the work of convincing themselves. A politician can say they'll fight for working families without defining what that means, and every voter hears their own version. A manager can tell you they're considering your input without committing to anything. A romantic interest can say they need space without saying whether it's temporary or permanent, so you stay available, hoping. The person using it appears more powerful than they are, more secure, more strategic, more impossible to pin down. But what makes it work is subtlety. The moment someone feels deliberately toyed with, the whole thing collapses into anger. Real strategic ambiguity feels almost accidental, like someone's just being thoughtful with their words. If you want to stay unreadable, be precise about facts but hazy about meaning. Say what happened, not what it meant. Promise effort, not outcomes. That gap between clarity and interpretation is where you disappear, answering the frame, not the question. Watch what happens when someone asks you, "Why are you being so defensive?" Your instinct is to answer it, to prove you're not defensive, which proves you are. The frame they set becomes the playing field, and you've already sprinted onto it. Your boss asks, "Why do you always miss the deadline?" And you're playing defense. A jealous partner says, "Why were you texting them?" And you're guilty until you prove otherwise. You don't get to stand outside and think clearly. You're already inside the cage, fighting the premise instead of questioning whether it's even true. Skilled people, manipulators, lawyers, negotiators, anyone who understands persuasion, they don't fight the frame by arguing within it. They reject the frame itself. When someone asks, "Why are you being difficult?" the unread move is to say, "I notice you've decided I'm being difficult. What actually happened from your side?" You've stopped answering the invisible cage and you've made it visible. Now you're the one asking questions. They feel suddenly exposed because they expected you to defend, to scramble, to live in their version of reality. Instead, you named it. The question carried an invisible trap inside it, and the moment you refuse to answer like it's fact, the power reverses. If you want to be unreadable, stop playing on fields other people designed. Start noticing when questions carry hidden accusations built into the grammar itself. Then refuse the game. Ask what they're actually asking, or ask why they framed it that way. Watch how much shifts the moment they have to make their invisible cage visible. Question laundering. Watch what happens when someone really wants you to agree but doesn't want to ask directly. They lob a question instead. And here's the trap. Questions feel safer than statements. A question doesn't demand. It invites. It sounds curious, not controlling, so you drop your guard. This is question laundering, and it's how skilled people slip their agenda past your radar without you noticing the fingerprints. The mechanic is simple. Instead of saying, "You're being selfish," they ask, "Don't you think you're being a little selfish?" Instead of, "That idea won't work," they wonder aloud, "How exactly do you think that's going to work?" The question wraps the statement in deniability. If you resist, they retreat into, "I'm just asking." But the real work has already been done. They've planted the frame. You're now defending against an idea that technically came from them, but you're carrying the weight. It gets darker with cascading questions. A manager asks, "How much experience do you really have with this?" Then, "Do you think this is something you should be taking on?" Then, "Maybe we should find someone with deeper expertise." Each one feels innocent, but together they're dismantling your confidence brick by brick. Because you answered each question, you feel complicit in the verdict. The fix isn't complicated, but it demands presence. When someone asks you something, pause and ask yourself, what statement are they really making? What conclusion do they want me to reach? If you catch that momentum before it builds, you've already broken the spell. You're no longer a passenger riding their logic. You're the driver of your own thinking, and they know it. The mirror deflection. Someone corners you with a direct question, what you want, what you're hiding, how you really feel, and something inside you shifts like a door closing. Instead of answering, you turn the spotlight back on them so fast it feels like natural conversation. Their motives come under scrutiny. Their tone was off. That thing they did yesterday, worse than anything you're being asked about. The whole room pivots and neither of you quite notices it happened. When someone mirrors your question back at you, well, why are you asking? They're not having a dialogue. They're performing a calculated disappearing act with plausible deniability baked in. The trick works because it feels generous, like they're curious about you, fair-minded, interested in your perspective. In reality, they've stolen the floor without leaving fingerprints. The real power lives in timing and that thin veil of sincerity. Deploy it the moment someone gets close, when vulnerability feels like exposure or genuine threat. A well-placed deflection can stretch across an entire dinner, an entire year, an entire relationship without ever tearing. Most people walk away thinking you listen deeply while learning almost nothing about you, and they won't even realize they talked the whole time about themselves. The catch is staying aware of when you're doing it, because the line between protecting yourself and actively vanishing gets thinner than you think. Once that line blurs enough, you stop knowing who you're hiding from or why. The mirror works both ways, and sometimes you end up staring at someone who isn't really there at all. Detecting phishing questions. Someone asks how your weekend was, and you answer. Then where you went, then who was there, and suddenly you realize they're not curious, they're mapping you. One small question at a time, that's a phishing question. It looks like conversation, feels like conversation, but underneath there's intent. They want information you haven't offered, and they're using casual chat as the bait. The genius is that phishing never announces itself. A real fisherman doesn't yell. They cast and wait. In conversation, this looks like gentle follow-ups, questions that seem to flow naturally from what you said, but are actually steering you toward specific territory. Maybe they ask about your finances after you mention a new hobby. Maybe they ask about your relationship after you mention feeling tired. The hook is soft enough, you don't feel it. Here's what catches most people. We want to be seen as honest and open, so we keep talking to prove we have nothing to hide. We fill silences, we over-explain. Every word becomes another pixel in the picture they're building. The move is simple but takes practice. Notice the shape of the question. Does it follow from what you said, or does it pivot to new ground? Is it asking for something you already volunteered, or reaching for something untouched? When you sense the redirect, you don't need to shut down or turn defensive. Just pause and breathe. Answer the question they asked, not the one hiding underneath it. Give them the surface and keep the rest close. That restraint, that small act of boundary setting without announcement, is where the real power lives. The compliment probe. Someone tells you that you have great taste in music. A small thing, but notice what happens next. Your shoulders drop, you soften, and suddenly you're more generous with information about yourself. You start talking. You believe this person gets you. That's the compliment probe at work, and it's one of the most efficient social tools ever engineered. Here's why it lands. A genuine compliment releases tension. Your nervous system reads it as safety. So when a manipulator pairs a real observation about you, your intelligence, your style, your kindness, with what comes next, you are already in a state of trust. Your guard is down. They're not fishing with bait. They're fishing with your own reflection. The trap is that it works on almost everyone. The person who prides themselves on reading people. The skeptic who thinks they're immune, the competitive one who lights up when someone notices their edge. Each of us has a compliment shaped exactly like us, and when it arrives, we don't feel probed, we feel seen. Watch for the pattern, specific praise followed by a question that goes deeper. You really listen to people. What's made you that way? Or, your place has such clarity. What matters most to you? The compliment opens the door. The question pulls you through it. By the time you realize you've shared something you didn't mean to, the architecture of trust is already built. When praise lands and feels true, pause. Notice if it's followed by curiosity about something private. Not all compliments hide an agenda, but the sharpest ones often do. Slow down before you answer the next question. Flattery pressure testing. You feel a small lift when someone says you're one of the few people who really get it. That's the hook being set, whether they know it or not. What's happening underneath is a boundary test. They're checking if praise will soften your judgment or nudge you toward what they want. Flattery is pressure testing wrapped in warmth, and it sticks because it feels like being truly seen when it's actually someone measuring exactly how much slack you'll give them once you feel good about yourself. You've probably done this too without naming it. Complimenting someone's taste before asking a favor, telling your boss they have great instincts before pitching something risky, softening the ground before the ask lands. It's not sinister in everyday life, it's social lubrication. But the darker version emerges once flattery becomes deliberate cataloging. A manipulator tracks your threshold with precision. Does a small compliment make you say yes to a bigger ask later? Will regular praise make you miss a red flag you'd normally catch? The person being tested rarely notices because the warmth feels individual and genuine, not like a measurement. The saving move is almost stupid in its simplicity. When someone flatters you and then asks for something, pause and notice the sequence. The warmth might be real, but that timing tells you to evaluate the ask itself completely separate from the glow of being praised. You don't need to become cynical or reject compliments. You just need to see the order they arrive in. That one habit, catching the pattern, stops flattery from ever becoming a tool that reliably works on you again. The false intimacy trap. Someone shares a secret with you on the second date. Your chest swells. They trust you already, really trust you, so you tell them something equally raw, something you don't tell most people, and suddenly you both feel like you've known each other forever. Your brain rewires the moment as closeness, but what you're actually experiencing is emotional exposure without earned safety. Real intimacy is built over time through consistency, through small conflicts that get resolved, through someone showing up when things are hard, not just when they're romantic. False intimacy is fast and cheap. It's the rush of being seen without actually being known. Here's what makes it dangerous. You mistake emotional exposure for emotional safety. You tell them your wounds, so you assume they can be trusted with your future. But vulnerability with a stranger is not the same as vulnerability with someone who has earned it. They might disappear next week. They might weaponize what you told them. You won't know until the test comes, and by then you've already handed them pieces of yourself. The unspoken contract feels sealed. You're intimate now, except intimacy requires time, witness, and reciprocal risk over years, not hours. The trick is to slow down your own sense of connection when someone mirrors you back too perfectly. Real people don't bond that fast. What you're feeling is the flattery of being mirrored, not the reality of being known. Next time someone opens up fast, smile, listen, and hold back your own story. Let them prove they can handle what matters to you first. That pause is the difference between connection and a beautiful lie. Reciprocity, pressure, resistance. You owe someone a favor and you feel it in your chest. Someone buys you lunch, writes you a recommendation, teaches you a skill, and suddenly there's a weight. That's reciprocity, and it moves through human behavior like water finding cracks. We are wired to repay debts, real or imagined, and most people know this about us whether they admit it or not. The trap is that you can't always see when someone is loading the debt first. A business contact sends you a gift you never asked for, then later mentions they're looking for a job. A family member helps you move, then years later reminds you of the exact day and hour, waiting for your turn to pay back the universe. The person who made the first move often gets to define what repayment looks like. Here's what changes the game. Recognize the moment the debt is placed on you, not after you've already agreed to carry it. When someone does something for you unprompted, pause before you thank them. Notice if there's an unspoken expectation attached. You can still be grateful and kind without being obligated. The second move is gentler but crucial. Offer something small back right away if you sense a setup. A thank you, a small return gesture. This breaks the accumulation pattern. It stops them from building a mountain of owing. The people who read you well depend on you feeling that weight for months or years, letting it grow heavier. The moment you acknowledge it clearly, something shifts. You're no longer reacting from guilt. You're choosing. Bait recognition training. Someone online says something designed to sting you, and you feel the hook before you even realize it's there. A comment about your politics, a dig at your appearance, a perfectly timed insult wrapped in fake concern. You know intellectually that you're being tested, and yet your fingers are already typing the defense. That moment between the bait and your response is where you lose leverage, and intelligent people lose it fastest because they trust their ability to dismantle an argument rather than simply not take it. Bait recognition isn't about avoiding provocation altogether. It's spotting the moment someone is fishing for an emotional reaction instead of information. They want you angry, defensive, or rattled because an angry person makes mistakes, reveals things, escalates, becomes predictable. The bait is always some version of an attack on identity, what you believe, who you are, what you value. What nobody tells you is that staying silent doesn't mean you're weak. It means you saw the whole game before they finished setting it up. Real bait recognition looks like this. You see the pull, you feel it land, you acknowledge it's there, and then you ask one question before responding. Is this person looking for truth or reaction? If it's reaction, silence, or a flat redirect becomes your best move. If it's truth, you can engage without the emotional charge that makes you sloppy. The difference isn't about being cold or superior. It's about staying in control when someone else is trying to take it. That space between stimulus and response is where your actual power lives, and most people never even know they're standing in it. Refusing the emotional invitation. Someone storms into a room and drops a grenade of anger in your lap. Maybe a harsh tone, a cutting remark, something designed to pull you down with them. That mood is an invitation, not a fact, not something you have to accept and carry. Most people take it anyway, and the moment they do, they're reading from the other person's script. You feel guilty when you shouldn't. You get defensive, you spiral. The angry person doesn't even have to do anything more because you've already handed over the controls. But what if you didn't take the invitation? What if you let their emotions sit there like an unclaimed package and just moved past it? This sounds impossible, almost cruel. Won't they think you don't care? Actually, the opposite happens. When you refuse to catch their emotional state, you're signaling something your nervous system picks up on instantly. You're solid. You're not easily rattled. You're not going to collude with their drama, which means you're either very confident or very dangerous. Either way, worth respecting. The trick isn't to be cold or dismissive or robotic about it. It's to acknowledge what they said without absorbing the emotional weather that came with it. I hear you is not the same as I'm upset with you too. Your calm becomes a mirror they can't break. Stay steady and watch how quickly most people recalibrate when they realize their hook didn't catch. That's when real power shows up, not in the reaction, but in the silence after, not in what you say back, but in what you choose not to feel. The non-defensive response. Someone says something sharp. your chest tightens. The old reflex kicks in. Defend, explain, prove them wrong, make them understand where they got it twisted. But here's what happens when you actually don't. You become someone they can't read, can't provoke, can't predict. A non-defensive response isn't about being cool or pretending the jab didn't land. It's about refusing to play the script they expect. When someone attacks, they're usually waiting for the counterattack, the denial, the rebuttal, the evidence of how hurt you are. That's the music they know. So if you step outside the rhythm entirely, something strange happens. They lose their footing. You could acknowledge what they said without arguing it. You could ask a genuine question back instead of defending. You could sit with the discomfort of not needing to be right in that moment. The real power isn't in keeping a poker face. It's in not needing one. When you stop fighting the narrative they're trying to write about you, they realize they have no actual leverage. You're not playing the game where hurt means you lost. Most people crack under pressure because they're still trying to convince someone of their worth, still reaching for evidence, still hoping the right explanation will finally make the other person see. But the moment you stop needing them to see, the moment you can hear criticism without the automatic flinch toward self-protection, you become genuinely unreadable. Not because you're hiding, because there's nothing left to hook into. That's when conversations shift from combat to something real, or they simply end. Either way, you've already won by not fighting. Provocation immunity drills. Most people think control means never reacting. That is backwards. Real control is the ability to react after you have chosen to, not before someone else's words light you up. Every insult, every jab, every loaded question is a hook someone is casting. If you bite immediately, they own the line. A provocation immunity drill is simply the practice of rehearsing non-reaction until it becomes automatic. Start small. Let someone say something deliberately annoying. A friend works best for this, and practice holding a half-second pause before you respond. Not silence, just a breath. In that breath, you shift from reactive to responsive, from being on their timeline to owning your own. You notice the provocation as it happens. Instead of being swept up in it, the science is solid. People who practice this genuinely become harder to read because they do not leak frustration before they speak. No jaw clench, no eye flash, no sudden tension. Just a person who chose their words instead of having their words chosen for them. The side effect is almost magnetic. People who seem unshakable feel genuinely different to be around. They do not spark conflict through their own heat. They move through jabs without telegraphing pain. What most people miss is that this pause is not avoidance. It is the moment where you get your power back. Try this for a week. Whenever someone pushes, pause. Notice the impulse to snap rising in your chest, then speak anyway. Watch what happens when you do not hand them your reaction before they have finished talking. You will feel the shift immediately, and others will notice it too, even if they cannot name it. That half-second pause becomes your freedom, and the people around you will sense they cannot pull you easily anymore. Delayed gratification of retort. Someone says something that lands like a small blade, and your whole body goes electric. The comeback is already there, fully formed, sitting on your tongue like a loaded spring. You want to fire it right now. But here is what separates people who stay readable from people who detonate. You don't say it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The delay is not weakness masquerading as control. It is control disguised as restraint. and it works because other people cannot see the weapon you chose not to use. When you snap back instantly, you confirm every assumption they made about you. You are reactive, predictable, hurt. They own the moment and the narrative both. But when you pause, when you breathe, when you let 3 seconds stretch into 5, something shifts in the room. They see you choosing not to respond, which means you are choosing something else instead. Maybe dignity, maybe information gathering, maybe you just decided they are not worth the energy. That uncertainty about your internal state makes you harder to read than any poker face could. The retort you hold back becomes your most powerful tool because they wonder if you even care enough to bother, or if you are already 5 moves ahead. Some of the sharpest people practice this relentlessly. They absorb the hit, then respond with something calculated that lands deeper because it springs from strategy, not reaction. Your silence speaks louder than your comeback ever could. The next time you feel that electric surge toward a witty destroy, count to 4. See what the room does without your noise filling it. That empty space is where power lives. Emotional time delay. You smile and nod in the moment, but 3 hours later, you're sitting alone and suddenly your chest tightens. The conversation replays. That comment lands different now. Your face gets hot. Your hands start shaking. The actual emotion is arriving late, and you're finally understanding what you should have felt then. This is emotional time delay. Your nervous system processing threat in layers. The first layer handles the immediate social performance, the mask, the staying calm in front of others. It's fast and shallow. The second layer runs in the background, slower and deeper, doing a full analysis. By the time that analysis finishes, you're alone, and the real feeling floods in. You weren't okay in that moment, you were just delayed. People who don't know about this often feel foolish or weak when the delayed emotion hits. You start rehearsing what you should have said. You get angry at yourself for not reacting in real time. But here's what matters. Your delayed reaction is actually your honest reaction. The calm you showed was the performance. The shaking 3 hours later was the truth finally catching up. If you want to stay unreadable in the moment while staying honest with yourself, you need to expect this lag. Sit with the delayed feeling when it comes. Don't shame it. It's not weakness. It's your system doing exactly what it's designed to do. The people who never show emotion in the moment aren't fearless. They're often just waiting for the real feeling to arrive when no one's watching. That's not mastery. That's just isolation on a schedule. The gray rock method. You know that person who feeds on your reaction, the one who says something cruel, watches your face light up with hurt or anger, and pokes until you explode or cry. That's when they win. Proof you're unstable, material for their next grievance, emotional fuel for the weak. The gray rock method is the quiet art of starving that dynamic by becoming boring, deliberately, strategically, completely. When they provoke, you respond in flat monotone. Okay, noted, No emotion, no defensiveness, no story, just the vocal equivalent of a parking lot. The genius is that manipulative behavior runs on feedback. They need your heat to feel alive, to justify their narrative, to prove something about themselves. Strip away the heat and the game stops being fun. It's like watching someone try to start a fire with wet wood. After enough failed attempts, they walk away looking for kindling that actually burns. Here's the thing though. This isn't about freezing out someone you love out of fear or habit. Gray rock is surgical and specific. It's for situations where you're trapped. A parent, An ex who won't leave you alone? A coworker who thrives on your distress? It's the minimum viable response, real enough you're not visibly ignoring them, bland enough there's nothing to grab onto. The trap most people fall into is using gray rock while their body screams, jaw tight, hands clenched, voice thin with restraint. They read all of that. The method only works when you're actually indifferent or close enough to sell it. That takes practice, but nail it and watch how fast they redirect their hunger elsewhere. Boring on purpose. There's a person in your life, maybe at work, maybe a family member, who never quite gives you what you want to know. You ask them about their weekend and get a 3-sentence nothing burger. You probe for opinion and they agree with whatever you just said. No heat, no edge, no tell. Most people assume they're shy or checked out, but sometimes that flatness is a weapon. The deliberate, boring person has figured out that mystery invites projection, and projection is the best invisibility cloak. When you leave a conversation with someone and you can't quite picture them, can't pin down what they actually want or fear or believe, that emptiness is by design. They've learned that the moment you become predictable or passionate or revealing, you become readable. So they sand themselves smooth. They use agreement like a mirror. They volunteer nothing that hasn't been asked 3 times already. And here's the trap. You'll keep talking, keep asking, keep trying to find the real version of them. You'll spill things you meant to keep close. You'll overshare to fill the silence because the silence feels like judgment. Meanwhile, they're sitting still, watching you map yourself out loud. The boring on purpose player knows that in most conversations, the person who talks most reveals most, so they don't. They stay flat, stay vague, stay safe, and the person across from them, that's you, walks away feeling red, when really you've just been ignored until you volunteered your blueprint. The next time someone seems too generic to be true, consider whether they're actually playing a different game. Consistency as camouflage. Watch the person at work who shows up exactly the same way every single day. Same coffee order, same desk arrangement, same measured tone in meetings. You trust them almost immediately, and you probably couldn't explain why. Your brain has learned to read predictability as honesty. Consistency signals safety, solidity, transparency, the idea that if someone has nothing to hide, they can afford to be the same person again and again. But this is also where camouflage lives. A person who knows how to perform a single character flawlessly becomes invisible precisely because they're so readable. The pattern itself becomes armor. A narcissist who learned early that charm disarms will deploy identical jokes, the same calculated vulnerability, perfect timing, across decades without slipping. A manipulator who discovered that steady calmness shuts down suspicion will never crack that facade, not for 1 second. You stop digging deeper because the surface is so smooth, your guard drops. The genuine dark turn is that real authenticity usually lives in the opposite place, in moments where someone contradicts themselves, shows confusion, drops the mask, reveals something raw and unplanned. Yet your brain has been wired to distrust exactly that. You've learned to worship the polished repetition and be suspicious of the messy human truth. So the person hiding most effectively is often the one who appears most transparent. The real skill isn't to become unpredictable yourself. That just creates noise. It's learning to notice when someone's consistency has become too perfect, too convenient, too carefully designed for what you want to see. That's usually where the actual person left the room and the character took the wheel. Predictable surface, random depth. You meet someone who seems easy to read. They smile on schedule, laugh at the same jokes, show up on time, say the right things. You think you have them figured out, and then one day they say something that comes from nowhere, a sudden confession, a dark joke, a preference you never expected. You realize you were reading the surface and assuming the depth matched. It didn't. The most unreadable people are often the ones with the most predictable routines because their consistency is a kind of camouflage. While you're busy noticing their punctuality or their friendly tone, the actual shape of what they think and want stays hidden underneath. Most of us do this backward. We assume predictability means transparency, that if someone is consistent, we understand them. But consistency is just a pattern of behavior. It tells you almost nothing about the reasoning, the fear, the shame, the ambition hiding beneath it. A person can show up to every dinner on time while harboring resentments you'd never guess. They can be reliably cheerful while nursing something close to rage. The ones who seem least like mysteries, the ones with the calm voice and the steady hand, might be performing the deepest version of being unreachable. The trick is learning to separate the rhythm from the content. Notice what they do, yes, but stop letting that tell you who they are. What they do is the stage. What they want, what scares them, what they're actually thinking, that's the play. And those two things almost never match as neatly as you think they do. Selective disclosure architecture. You tell your therapist one version of why you left your last job. You tell your mother another. You tell your best friend a third. None of them are lies. They are all true, just different angles of the same moment. That is selective disclosure, and it is not manipulation. It is survival. But when you weaponize it, when you deliberately hand each person a story designed to make them see you a certain way while hiding the parts that contradict that image, you become impossible to know. The trick is that people trust their version of you more than they trust you. They have invested in it, shaped their sense of you around it, so they defend it against evidence. A coworker sees you as the reliable one who never drops the ball, so when you struggle, they assume you are just having an off week, not that you are drowning. A parent sees you as the responsible child, so when you fail, it is blamed on external factors, never your choices. You have trained them to see you this way by choosing what they get to see. The power is real. It keeps you safe, keeps judgment at bay, lets you move through different worlds without collision. But here is the quiet cost. The more versions of you exist in different rooms, the less you know which one is real. You become so practiced at reading a room and deciding what fragment to offer that you forget who you are when alone. The people closest to you hold pieces of a puzzle that will never fit together because you made sure they would never see the whole picture. The slow reveal ladder. There's a reason poker players don't show their entire hand on the first deal, and neither do people who know how to keep others guessing about who they really are. The slow reveal ladder is the art of disclosing yourself in carefully measured doses, each one designed to test whether the other person has earned the right to climb higher. Imagine you meet someone at a dinner party. You start with the public version, your job, where you're from, something polished, and resume ready. If they seem trustworthy, genuinely curious, not the type to weaponize what you say, you might reveal the next rung. A small vulnerability, a genuine opinion that's slightly unpopular, something slightly more you. Most people rush this. They dump their whole story on someone they just met, treating the latter like a slide. But the masters of unreadability, they watch. They notice who leans in, who asks follow-up questions that show actual listening, who respects a boundary when you set one, Each rung gets revealed only after the person below has proven they won't hurt it or use it against you. You become impossible to fully read because even intimate friends may only ever reach certain rungs, not out of coldness, but out of clarity. You're not being mysterious for ego. You're being smart about emotional real estate. The person who reveals everything to everyone is readable because they're predictable and defenseless. The person who reveals strategically, they stay ahead. They control what's known when it's known and by whom. That's how you stay 3 moves ahead in every conversation. Trial balloon secrets. A few weeks before they ask for the real thing, they ask for something smaller, mention it offhand at dinner, slip it into a text, frame it as hypothetical, and they're watching your face the whole time. This is a trial balloon, a test disguised as conversation, and most people never notice they're being read. What makes it work is that it operates below the surface of formal requests. Your defenses are down because nothing feels official yet, and you're not bracing. You're just responding naturally, which tells them everything about where your actual lines live. React with alarm to the small version, and they know the big ask will meet resistance. Nod along, and they've got your permission before you even realized there was a vote. Salespeople float budget questions as trial balloons for the close. A partner mentions their ex's new relationship to test whether jealousy still lives in you. Your boss casually asks if you'd consider shifting hours, floating the idea that something bigger might shift soon. The real trap isn't that trial balloons are dishonest. It's that they give someone a free read on your actual boundaries without you having time to construct a polished answer. You reveal your real limits, your real values, your real fears in that unguarded moment. Once they know where you actually stand, they calibrate their real ask to land exactly where you'll say yes, and you won't even know you've been mapped. The antidote is quieter than you'd think. When someone floats something that feels even slightly loaded, pause before answering. Ask yourself whether you're responding to what was said or bracing for what might come next. That breath is where your power lives. Decoy preferences. You're at a coffee shop staring at 3 sizes, small for $5, large for $8, and a medium wedged between them at $7.50. You reach for the large. The medium was never meant to be bought. It exists to make large look like the smart choice, and it works. That phantom option is a decoy, and right now it's rewriting how you value things without you feeling it happen. Your brain stops calculating absolute worth and starts measuring relative worth instead. Large is cheaper than medium and gives you more than small, so it wins. Restaurants, car dealerships, and subscription platforms have perfected this. A streaming service dangles basic at $8, premium at $15, and an in-between tier at $14 that nudges you toward premium like a magnet. That decoy shifts your entire sense of fair pricing. Here's what matters. You believe you have stable preferences, but they're fragile. They shift the moment a third option appears, especially if that third option is engineered to make something else shine by comparison. You're not choosing based on what you actually need anymore. You're choosing based on what looks good relative to a planted reference point. The mechanism runs invisible. You feel rational. You feel like you chose, but you were guided. Next time a third option suddenly appears, a middle-priced tier, a compromise candidate, a new path at work, pause before you decide. Ask yourself, would I pick the same thing if that third option simply didn't exist? If your answer shifts, you've caught a decoy in the act, stealing your preference before you even knew you had one. Information asymmetry maintenance. Watch what happens when someone in power gets asked a direct question. A boss explains the restructure without showing you the numbers. A partner knows something about your shared life and keeps it quiet. A friend shares one vulnerability and you assume they've told you the whole story. None of these people are being cruel. They're playing the only game that keeps influence alive. Information asymmetry is the gap between what you understand and what they hold back, and whoever maintains that gap controls not just the conversation, but the entire relationship's shape. Most of us think power lives in being smarter or louder, but the real architects of influence learned long ago to weaponize what you don't know. They hand you just enough truth to seem transparent while keeping the critical layer locked away. You ask direct questions and get answers that sound reasonable but leave you still searching for the thing they didn't say. They share details about one problem while staying silent about 3 others. You feel informed because they volunteered something. They feel in control because you still don't see the full board. This gets especially brutal in relationships and work because trust gets tangled up with knowledge. You trust someone because they told you something vulnerable, so your brain assumes they've told you everything. But selective honesty is still honesty, and it's far more powerful than any lie. The lies you catch sting briefly and fade. The truth you never find out shapes how you move, who you trust, and what you decide for years. To stay readable yourself, notice when you're doing this, when you're sharing strategically to maintain upper ground instead of actually connecting. The people impossible to read aren't mysterious or clever. They're just disciplined about which doors stay permanently closed. Manufactured plausible motive. You've probably noticed how quickly people invent explanations for things that confuse them. A coworker seems distant, so you assume they're angry at you. Your partner forgets to text back, so they must be losing interest. The human brain abhors a vacuum and will fill it with whatever story fits the shape of your anxiety. This is where manufactured plausible motive lives, and it's devastatingly easy to weaponize against someone else or to accidentally deploy it against yourself. Here's how it works in the wild. Someone does something you don't fully understand. Your mind scans for the simplest, most emotionally resonant explanation, not the true one necessarily, but the one that feels coherent. And once that story takes hold, you start interpreting everything through it. A joke lands wrong? Proof of their contempt. A canceled plan? They never valued you anyway. The dangerous part is that plausible motives are often just plausible enough to survive scrutiny. They don't require wild stretches. They slot into existing fears and biases you already carry. People use this all the time in arguments, accusations, even subtle reputation work. They don't say someone is malicious. They just keep nodding along to the explanation that everyone already suspects. The quietest defense against this is checking the gap between what you actually know and what you're assuming fills it. What did they really say or do? What else could that mean? Can you sit with the real answer, which is often just, I don't know, without reaching for the comfortable story? That pause is where the trick loses its power. Cover story parsimony. Watch someone explain why they stayed in a relationship too long and the answer shrinks the more you listen. I love them. We had history. I didn't want to be alone. But the real reason, shame, financial fear, dread of how their family would judge them, the painful fact they ignored red flags for years, that lives somewhere else entirely. Behind a door they won't crack open with a stranger. So they grab the simplest, most socially acceptable story within arm's reach. That's cover story parsimony, the human habit of choosing the easiest narrative instead of the truthful one. Because truth demands vulnerability and complexity most people aren't ready to broadcast to the world. Here's what makes this dangerous if you're trying to read someone. They're not lying exactly. They've simply selected the explanation that requires the fewest awkward admissions, the smallest number of confessions. Someone who tells you, "I left because we weren't compatible," might be leaving out years of poor treatment, staying only because fear of starting over felt bigger than the pain. Someone who says, "I'm fine" after a breakup might mean, "I'm suffocating, but I won't show you that weakness." The cover story feels true to them by the time they say it aloud. It's simpler, it protects them. It's why you can talk to someone for hours and still miss why they actually did what they did. The real signal lives in what's absent, the parts of the story that would require them to look foolish, admit ignorance, or confess fear. Those gaps are often louder than any words they speak. Preemptive framing. Watch what happens the next time someone brings you bad news wrapped in context first. "Look, I know this is going to sound bad, but here's what really happened." They're not softening you up. They're building a frame around the facts before you even hear them. And once that frame is in place, your brain filters everything that comes next through it. This is preemptive framing, and it works because you absorb the frame as truth before your critical mind has time to catch up. The frame becomes the lens, not a choice you made. Imagine a manager saying, "Everyone's been stressed and we've all made mistakes, but I need to talk to you about your performance." Notice how that opening already positioned the conversation as mutual struggle rather than individual failure. By the time they list your specific issues, you're already sympathetic to everyone, including yourself. The confession becomes softer. The criticism lands lighter. You can use this backward too. When you want to be heard fairly, frame the conversation before the details arrive. "I'm bringing this up because I respect you and want to fix it." Prime someone for receptiveness. "I need to vent about something stupid I did." Disarms defensiveness before you even confess. The trap is thinking preemptive framing is honest because the facts that follow are real. The facts may be true, but the frame is a choice, one that shapes how every single fact gets weighted in another person's mind. Start noticing when frames land before content. That's when you know someone is banking on your brain, moving too fast to question the setup. Owning the label first. Someone will eventually say something sharp about you, maybe that you're defensive or selfish or too much. The instinct is to fight back to prove it's not true, but there's a darker move, and it's one of the oldest tricks in human psychology. You call it yourself first. You own the label before anyone else can throw it at you. You say, "Yeah, I can be selfish," or "I know I come on too strong," and suddenly you've stolen their weapon. When they try to land the same criticism later, it bounces off because you've already processed it out loud. You've turned vulnerability into control. The brilliance is immediate. It does two things at once. First, it makes people trust you more because self-awareness reads as strength and honesty, even when you're being purely strategic. Second, it neutralizes shame. Shame needs secrecy. The moment you speak the thing out loud, you rob it of its power to hurt you. But here's the subtle part. You're not actually fixing anything. You're moving the shame from your hidden inner world into the public space where you control the narrative. You're rewriting the story before they can write it for you. This works in job interviews, relationships, first dates, social settings, anywhere someone is forming an impression. The person who names their own flaws first seems like the person with nothing to hide, and maybe they don't. Or maybe they're just reading the room faster, finding the weakest stone in the wall before anyone else picks it, then handing it over as a choice instead of letting it look like a fracture. Vulnerability as smokescreen. Someone tells you they're a mess, that they've always struggled, that they don't know what they're doing half the time, and you feel closer to them immediately. Walls drop, trust spikes because they showed you something real. And that's exactly the play. The confession isn't always honesty. Sometimes it's a weapon disguised as surrender, a calculated move that looks like courage. When someone performs their brokenness early and often, when they lead with their flaws before you can find them, they control the entire narrative around those flaws. You stop looking for anything worse because they've already handed you the story, wrapped in the language of self-awareness, which makes it feel voluntary and true. Here's the hinge. Real vulnerability takes time to build and often arrives reluctantly, sometimes against the person's own resistance. Performed vulnerability shows up immediately, in measured doses, always at moments that serve the deliverer. They're not confused about their damage. They're weaponizing your empathy, turning your kindness into a blindfold. You become so focused on being gentle, on meeting them in their honesty, that you stop asking harder questions. You become the person who refuses to scrutinize further because that would feel cruel, and they counted on exactly that. The person flooding you with self-criticism before you've even asked a single difficult question about them isn't being brave. They're being strategic, buying your silence with your own compassion. Watch for the difference between someone who flinches when exposed and someone who recites their wounds like a rehearsed monologue. Real fractures feel unintentional. Performed ones always land exactly right, like they've been tested 100 times before. Strategic small confession. You've probably noticed that the most likable people in a room aren't the ones who seem perfect. They're the ones who slip and admit something small, a minor embarrassment, a tiny failure, a moment they felt stupid. Watch what happens next. Everyone relaxes. Suddenly, they're human, and suddenly you trust them more. That shift is real psychology, not accident. Strategic confession is the art of revealing just enough vulnerability to feel authentic while keeping your actual cards face down. It works because our brains are wired to distrust people who seem flawless. A crack in the armor makes you credible, but here's where it gets tactical. The confession has to be small enough to feel genuine and large enough to matter. If you admit you took too long in the shower this morning, nobody cares. If you admit you're terrified of failure in your whole career, you've just handed someone a weapon. The sweet spot is something like, I said the wrong thing in that meeting and felt embarrassed for an hour. Or, I'm actually not great at math despite people assuming I am. Those confessions feel true without exposing your core vulnerabilities. They create the impression of openness while keeping your actual insecurities locked away. The moment someone believes you're being transparent about something, they lower their guard around you entirely. They assume the rest of what you're showing them is equally honest. You've borrowed trust through a small, calculated leak. The real players know this. Let people see your shadow, not your darkness. It's the difference between vulnerability as a weapon and vulnerability as a wound, the controlled tell. There's a specific moment when someone decides to let you see a crack in their mask, not because they slip, but because they choose to. You ask how they're doing after a bad week, and they sigh, run a hand through their hair, let their shoulders drop just enough that you believe you've glimpsed the real person underneath. The vulnerability feels like a gift, or maybe it's calculus. A controlled tell is the strategic revelation of a genuine emotion or struggle, deployed to disarm you, build instant trust, and make you lower your guard at exactly the right moment. It's not a lie, which is what makes it so surgical. The sigh is real. The exhaustion is real. But the decision to show it to you right now, in this exact context, that's a move. Politicians do this constantly. The candidate who tears up slightly when discussing a sick relative, the boss who admits they were scared when younger, making their confidence feel earned and trustworthy. Watch how the smooth operator confesses a past failure that makes them seem humble just before asking for something significant. The real trap is assuming that raw emotion equals honesty. Someone can feel something deeply and still perform it for effect. The feeling and the performance aren't mutually exclusive. They occupy the same moment. What shifts everything is asking yourself a sharper question. Is showing this emotion serving their interests right now? Would you trust them less if they hadn't revealed this crack? That pause, that tiny moment where suspicion blooms, is often your only defense against someone who knows exactly which of their truths will make you believe their lies. Deliberate false pattern. You meet someone who always texts back slowly, but one day they reply in seconds. Your brain lights up. Something has changed. They care more now. They're thinking about you, and you change your behavior to match this new signal. They've won exactly what they wanted without saying a word. This is deliberate false pattern, and it's one of the cleanest manipulation tools because it hijacks your pattern recognition system. Your brain is built to spot patterns and predict what comes next. It's kept humans alive for millennia. But when someone knows this, they can plant a fake pattern, establish it as real through repetition, then break it at exactly the right moment to make you feel seen or chosen. A person might be consistently cold, then warm for one perfect week, then cold again. You'll spend months trying to earn back that warmth, convinced it proves something about your worth or your potential. Intermittent reinforcement, the schedule used to train rats in cages, works just as well on you. The cruel part is that false patterns are invisible because they work through your own inference. No one lied, no rules were broken. They just let you draw a conclusion and then moved the goalpost. Once you understand someone is running this play, the antidote is simple. Track data instead of feeling. Write down the actual frequency of replies, the actual tone across weeks, the actual follow-through rate. Your gut will scream that you're being cold or paranoid. That's the signal you're seeing through the trick. Trust the ledger, not the moment. Poker's reverse tell. A skilled poker player knows that when someone suddenly goes very still, they might be hiding a strong hand. But here's where most people get it backwards. The real trick isn't spotting the obvious nervous tick. It's noticing when someone erases their normal tells entirely. You've seen this in real life. Your partner stops fidgeting when discussing their weekend plans, or a coworker's face goes neutral the moment you ask about that missed deadline. The absence of their usual behavior is louder than any stammer. This is the reverse tell, and it works because humans are creatures of baseline. We fidget, we gesture, we blink at a certain rhythm when comfortable, but the moment we feel scrutinized or need to hide something, we grip ourselves. The body tightens, movement vanishes, and that's when people think they're being clever, believing that if they stop moving, stop talking with their hands, stop letting their face do its normal work, they've become unreadable. But you spotted it the second they went robotic. The deeper game is this. Some people know this trick and know that you know it, so they deliberately maintain their baseline, staying bouncy and natural even when lying, using their own tells as camouflage. At that level, reading someone becomes less about tracking behavior and more about noticing inconsistencies between what their mouth says and what their stakes should feel like. A person defending something small with the body tension, usually reserved for something huge, is displaying more than they realize. Watch for the mismatch between the message's weight and the effort it's costing them to hold still. Randomized response schedule. Your phone buzzes, but not at the same time yesterday did, and not when you expect it tomorrow. That unpredictability is the whole design. Slot machines figured it out decades ago. The notification that arrives on a fixed schedule loses its grip the moment your brain clocks the pattern, but random payoffs. Random makes your nervous system sit forward. You check email again. You try the lever one more time. You scroll past the point where you meant to stop. This is a variable ratio reinforcement schedule, and it works because your brain cares far less about average reward than about the possibility of reward arriving right now. Your ancestors needed that alert mechanism, the randomness of finding food, the unpredictable danger appearing at the tree line. Evolution wired you to stay tuned to the unexpected. Now advertisers and app developers weaponize that same circuitry with surgical precision. And because randomness feels less engineered than a fixed schedule, it feels almost natural, almost innocent. Your brain doesn't register it as manipulation the way it would a predictable pattern, which is exactly why it works. Video games learn this. Social media learn this. The apps you use daily are running the same lever pull that kept your great-grandparents alive and alert. What separates the person who notices from the person who doesn't is simple: recognition. Can you feel the difference between scrolling because you want to and scrolling because the machine learned exactly how many seconds to wait before the next dopamine hit? That awareness alone, that pause where you catch yourself mid-reach, is rarer than you'd think, and it's the first crack in the design. Mirroring detection. You walk into a coffee shop and someone you've just met leans forward the same way you do. They touch their chin when you touch yours. Their speech rhythm starts matching yours. It feels warm, like connection. But what if that warmth was engineered? Mirroring is one of the oldest moves in the sales and manipulation playbook, and most people never clock it because they're too busy feeling understood. It works because it whispers to your neurology, "This person is like me, so I can trust them." The mimic becomes a mirror of your own brain's safety signals, and your guard drops without you noticing. Therapists use it ethically. Confidence scammers weaponize it. The real danger isn't the technique, it's how quickly it hijacks your judgment once someone feels mirrored. You stop testing, you stop asking hard questions, you assume alignment where there might be none. The spell is powerful because it's invisible, baked into your nervous system before your mind even registers it. Here's what shifts the game. When someone feels unusually comfortable or you find yourself inexplicably liking them fast, take a mental step back and actually watch their hands, their posture, their tempo. Are they matching you, or are you just hungry for connection and filling in the rest? Pay attention to the speed of the trust. Does it feel earned through time and friction, or gifted all at once? Detection is the only real defense, not paranoia, just clarity. Next time someone seems to get you perfectly, especially early, notice it. You're not being paranoid. You're finally watching the magic trick instead of standing there amazed by it. Anti-mirroring. Most people believe connection happens through synchrony. Lean when they lean, smile when they smile, nod along with the rhythm of their words. But there's a sharper, stranger move that works even better. and it inverts everything you've learned about how two people actually click. Anti-mirroring means you deliberately break the rhythm. Stay still while they're animated, keep your face neutral while theirs shifts through emotion, speak slower while they rush. It sounds cold, feels calculated, and that's precisely why it magnetizes people. Your stillness becomes the center of gravity. They start chasing it, studying you for micro expressions, adjusting their own energy to match yours instead of the reverse. You've handed them the work of connection, and they're doing the labor now. A therapist does this without naming it. They sit quiet while you spill everything. They don't laugh at your nervous jokes. They let silence breathe. Suddenly, you feel truly seen, like they're actually listening instead of performing agreement back at you. In negotiation or interrogation, anti-mirroring becomes lethal. Someone enters hot, words tumbling fast, and you respond with calm deliberation, maybe even a pause before answering. They feel unmoored. They over-explain, filling the void you created, giving you information you never asked for. The deepest current underneath. When you refuse to mirror, you're broadcasting without words that you're not invested in being liked. That detachment is intoxicating. People trust what seems indifferent far more than what seems eager to please. The person who leans back always gets leaned toward, and they'll spend the rest of the conversation trying to understand why. Rhythm breaking. Someone shifts topics mid-sentence while you're still landing yours, or asks a raw personal question when you expected small talk, or goes silent for just a beat too long. That electrical jolt in your chest. That's what happens when the rhythm breaks. Humans are pattern machines. Conversation has a breathing pattern. Statement, response, acknowledgement, next statement. It feels safe because you can predict it. The moment someone interrupts that cadence, your brain flips into alert mode. You stop autopiloting and start watching them instead. Here's what makes it powerful. People who break their own rhythm seem authentic, like they're so calm they can afford to be unpredictable. People who break yours seem dangerous, which makes them feel like they have something you don't. A skilled person weaponizes this. They'll establish a steady rhythm with you first, mirroring your pace, matching your tone, then snap the pattern sharply. The pause that's too long, the laugh that doesn't fit, the sudden directness after gentleness. Each break creates a small tremor in your nervous system. You lean in to restore the pattern. You become hyper-aware of them. This is how someone becomes magnetic without saying anything special. The pattern break forces you to reorganize around them. Most people don't notice they're doing it. Some learned it through natural social intelligence. Others picked it up over years of watching what makes people stick. Pay attention the next time someone's rhythm shifts with you, when they move from casual to serious, warm to cold, fast talking to thoughtful silence. That's usually intentional. They're not nervous or distracted. They're testing whether you'll follow them into the new rhythm, and most people do. Tempo mismatch. Watch what happens when you speed up your words while someone else is still processing. They haven't landed on your first point yet, and you're already 3 ideas ahead. Most people don't notice they're lost. They just feel stupid or rushed or dismissed. That feeling rewires how they think about you. You didn't insult them, you just refused to let them keep up. It's a subtle rejection that lives in timing, not content. The trick works because it's nearly invisible. If you speak at someone's natural rhythm instead of yours, you slip under their defenses. You feel present instead of eager, deliberate, not desperate. This is why therapists pause, why good negotiators lean back, why the people who feel most dangerous to read never seem to be rushing anywhere. They match your tempo like a mirror, not to mock you, but to colonize the space where you feel safe enough to unfold. On the other side, If someone keeps speeding up on you, they're either nervous about losing control or they're already controlling the frame and don't need your input anymore. Notice which one it is. The pacing tells you everything. Slow speech can mean confidence or contempt. Fast speech usually means one of three things: anxiety about being interrupted, a need to stay ahead of challenge, or someone who's already decided what you'll say next. The truly dangerous ones? They slow down when they're hunting. They give you room to hang yourself. Tempo mismatch isn't a mistake. It's a calculated weapon. Learn to use it or you'll feel it being used on you. The interrogators lean. Watch a detective lean forward during questioning, and you're watching centuries of power collapse into a single gesture. That lean, closing distance, lowering the body, is not casual. It's a pressure technique disguised as intimacy, and it works because your nervous system cannot tell the difference between someone moving closer because they like you and someone moving closer because they want something from you. Your body just reads proximity equals vulnerability. You instinctively want to match it, to soften, to fill the silence with words. This is why interrogators and high-pressure salespeople both do it. This is why your therapist sits back and waits while your boss leans in and rushes. Proximity manufactures confession the way silence manufactures sound. The trapped feeling when someone leans in too close is not paranoia. It's your reptile brain correctly identifying that space itself is being weaponized against you. The interrogator's lean works because it removes your exit strategy without ever touching you. In casual settings, a bar, a coffee shop, a boardroom, when someone leans, they're testing whether you'll hold ground or fold. The trick is noticing the lean before your nervous system decides for you. Lean back slightly. Ask them a question instead of answering theirs. Force them to bridge the gap, and suddenly the power equation shifts. What felt like their control becomes their discomfort. When you stay still and refuse to close that space, the vulnerability flips quietly back onto their shoulders, and you've turned their own pressure move into your advantage without ever saying a word. Posture neutrality. You're sitting across from someone trying to read whether they're interested or dismissing you, and they lean back. Your brain writes the story instantly. Detached, unimpressed, done. But the person in the coffee shop next to you is leaning back too, and they're thinking about their mortgage payment. The body doesn't always tell the truth, and learning to see through posture performance is how you stop getting played. Most people telegraph emotions through their chairs like they're writing in neon, lean forward when invested, shrink when threatened, angle shoulders away when mentally leaving. But the ones who've learned to neutralize their posture sit like they're not there, same spine angle, whether they're loving what you said or mentally planning how to use it against you. It's not that they have no emotions. They've decoupled the physical tell from the internal experience. Think of it like a poker face for your skeleton. What makes this skill dangerous is that once someone owns posture neutrality, you lose one of your primary radar systems. You can't read the lean back dismissal. You can't catch the forward lean agreement. You can't see the small collapse that signals vulnerability. They become harder to manipulate, harder to know when you've landed, harder to predict what happens next. But here's the flip side. If you learn to do this first, people will keep trying to read you long after you've already read them. Sit like you're neutral about everything. Don't collapse into interest. Don't shrink away from challenge. That still spine, that unreactive frame, that controlled breath, it makes you invisible and lethal at the same time. Hand stillness. Watch someone's hands the next time they're telling you a lie or hiding something they really want to say. 9 times out of 10, they go quiet. Not sleepy quiet, dead quiet. The gestures that were painting the air a moment ago just stop. It's one of the most reliable tells in human behavior, and almost nobody notices it because we're all staring at faces. Your hands are a live broadcast of your nervous system, and when your brain decides something is dangerous to express, it kills the transmission. Hands that were animated become locked on a lap or pressed flat against a table. Some people grip their own wrists. Others fold their fingers so tightly the knuckles go white. What's happening is a kind of self-censorship at the motor level. Your brain is literally suppressing the gesture before it can leak the truth. The conscious mind is saying one thing while the body is screaming, "I'm controlling myself right now." You can use this in 2 directions. If you're reading someone, stillness in the hands while their mouth keeps moving is worth a second question, a pause, a moment of gentle pressure. They've already told you something's off, but here's the sharper move. If you're the one being read, learn to let your hands breathe. The people who seem most composed, most impossible to crack, aren't the ones who grip and freeze. They're the ones who keep their hands honestly mobile, even when saying hard things. Movement that matches the words feels like truth. Stillness, however calm it looks, always sounds an alarm. Self-soothing gesture control. Watch someone during a tense conversation and you'll see their hand drift toward their neck, or their fingers start rubbing their palm, or their leg bounce under the table. They're not aware they're doing it, but you are. That little gesture is a leak in their composure, a self-soothing mechanism firing because their nervous system just flagged a threat. The moment you recognize it, you have real information. They're managing anxiety, doubt, or discomfort right now, whether their words say so or not. Most people believe they control their face, their tone, their words, and they do to a point. But the body's self-soothing vocabulary is ancient and mostly automatic. A touch to the collarbone, the jaw, the inner wrist, picking at a cuticle, crossing and uncrossing legs, hair twirling, rubbing an earlobe. These aren't choices, they're leaks from the nervous system saying, "I need to regulate right now." The real power isn't in catching someone red-handed. It's in reading what those gestures actually mean about the room's temperature. When you see those movements multiply or accelerate, you know the stakes have risen in their mind, even if they're staying perfectly calm in speech. It tells you exactly where pressure is landing beneath the surface. The move that actually works is noticing and then shifting your own approach. If they're self-soothing, pushing harder only triggers more defensive gestures, more walls. Back off slightly, lower your voice, create genuine safety. They'll relax, their hands will settle, and that's when real information flows. Become someone who recognizes distress before it hardens into defensiveness and people open up to you instead of bracing against you. Feet betray direction. Watch someone's feet the next time they're in a conversation they want to leave. Their upper body might stay turned toward you, chin tilted, shoulders squared, all the theater of presence, but their feet will be pointed at the door. This matters more than you think, and it's why reading a room is less about what people say and more about where their center of gravity wants to go. Your feet don't lie the way your face does. Your face learns early to perform. Your feet never got the memo. They orient toward what you actually want, what actually matters, what you're mentally already moving toward. A person can smile while their toes edge sideways. A negotiator can nod agreement while their stance angles toward escape. In boardrooms, interrogation rooms, and bedrooms, the body is honest in increments, and feet are the first domino to fall. This is why certain people seem to know what you really think before you say it. They're not mind readers, they're just watching the small, unconscious pivots that happen long before your mouth catches up to your intentions. The trap is subtle. Once you start noticing feet, conversations feel thinner, promises feel lighter, and trust becomes harder to give. But here's the other edge. You can use this awareness yourself. Next time you're trying to seem fully present, ground your feet hard into the floor. Make your whole body agree with what you're saying. Because everyone reads feet. Most people just don't know they're doing it. The ones who do, the ones paying attention to that small, honest signal, they're the ones who always seem to know what's really happening in the room before anyone else does. Proxemic control. Watch someone's face the moment you step into their breathing space. Their pupils dilate, their jaw tightens, they take a small breath in. You have not said a word, and they are already nervous. That invisible radius around your body, the one that shifts depending on who you are and what you want, is called proxemics, and it is one of the oldest power moves in human interaction. Most people think boundaries are set by feeling or politeness. They are not. They are set by who controls the space. When you lean in close during a negotiation, you force someone into a state of mild threat. Their amygdala activates slightly. Their thinking becomes more reactive, less strategic. They feel cornered, so they either pull back or capitulate faster just to restore comfort. The inverse works too. If you maintain distance during moments when intimacy should feel natural, when someone shares something vulnerable, or when you're supposed to be allies, you send a cold signal. I do not trust you. I do not want to be close to you. Space is intimacy's language, and most people never realize they are being told a story through inches. Proxemic control works best when the other person cannot name what is happening. They just feel unsettled or unsafe or rejected, and they blame themselves or assume the relationship has shifted. But you know exactly what you are doing. Distance and closeness, proximity and retreat, these are instruments. Learn to play them, and you will find people responding to signals they cannot quite identify, let alone defend against. Angle of approach management. You walk into a negotiation wanting something. Your instinct is to lead with why you want it, your reasoning, your need, your logic. That's exactly backwards, and the best manipulators know this. The angle of approach isn't about the truth of what you're saying. It's about which direction you come from, so the other person's defenses don't activate. If you ask your boss for a raise by explaining your bills and your stress, you've approached from, I need, and their first thought is, that's not my problem. If you approach from, here's what I've delivered that makes me more valuable than the market rate, you flipped the entire frame. Same desire, different entry point. The person hears the same words, but feels like they're discovering something rather than being asked for charity. Angle management works because human psychology has blind spots that depend on direction. Criticism lands differently if it comes after praise than if it arrives first. A request feels more like an opportunity if you approach it through their interest rather than yours. Even the same conversation, rotated 90 degrees, changes which walls go up and which stay down. The manipulation is subtle because it's not dishonest. It's just strategic about where you touch the door so it swings open instead of locking. Think about the last time someone got you to do something you thought you wouldn't. They probably didn't change the ask. They changed the angle. Notice where you're approaching from next time you want something. Then ask yourself, what angle would make them want to say yes before you even finish speaking? Non-escalation dominance. There's a moment in most conflicts when someone realizes they don't have to match your energy. You're raising your voice, defending hard, maybe getting heated, and they just stay quiet, stay steady. It flips the whole power dynamic in ways your nervous system registers before your mind catches up. The person who remains calm in a storm often walks away with more control than the one throwing lightning, and this isn't about niceness or weakness. It's a calculated move, a dominant signal most people can't read consciously but feel everywhere. When you stay unmoved by someone's attempt to escalate, you're telling them their emotional intensity doesn't affect you. Think about a boss who never raises her voice in a meeting full of shouting, or a partner who doesn't react to your anger, just listens. You end up exhausting yourself trying to provoke a reaction that won't come. Your intensity becomes proof you're rattled, while their calm becomes proof they own the room. Here's what happens next. People often escalate harder when they're not getting a reaction, trying to break through that wall, but that just burns their credibility and emotional reserves faster. Meanwhile, the non-escalator is banking that you'll eventually tire out and start wondering why they're not fighting back. And in that wondering, control has already shifted. If you want to be impossible to read and hard to provoke, stop matching the room's temperature. When conflict heats up, go colder, not cold as punishment, but cold as proof you've got nothing to prove. The person who refuses to dance to someone else's tempo is the one leading the song, and everyone watching knows it. Calm as high status. Watch what happens the next time you're in a room where two people disagree. The one who raises their voice first usually loses, not because their argument is weaker, but because they just signaled scarcity, a shortage of composure, control, a desperation to be heard. Meanwhile, the person who stays steady, who speaks a touch slower, who lets silence sit for a breath longer than comfortable, they own the room. We read calm as evidence of abundance. If you're not rattled, it means you've seen this movie before. You're not threatened, you have options. Panic broadcasts poverty, composure broadcasts power. This is why the best negotiators sound almost bored. Why CEOs and predators alike practice that slow blink stare. Why a parent's whisper in an argument can be more terrifying than a shout. Your nervous system is a broadcaster, whether you're aware of it or not. Trembling hands, rapid speech, a laugh that comes too fast. These all scream that you need this outcome, that you're unsure, that something just cracked. But someone who can lose and stay level, someone who can take an insult without flinching, they signal they're not dependent on your approval or your agreement. And here's the dark part. People believe what they see. If you act like you're untouchable, most of them will treat you that way. Not because you actually are, but because calmness is contagious in reverse. It makes others feel the threat. The move is subtle. It's not aggression rebranded. It's simply refusing to let your fear show its face. That refusal is what people mistake for certainty. The status-neutral voice. There's a person in every room who you can't quite read because they don't sound like they need anything from you. Not cold, not fake, just level. They talk the same way to the CEO, the intern, the parent, the stranger. No pitch shift upward when they're uncertain, no vocal flinch when they're challenged, no brightness when they want approval. If you've ever felt oddly trusted by someone who barely knew you, you were probably listening to a status-neutral voice. It's magnetic because it's rare. Most of us leak our social position in every sentence. We inflate when we feel small. We shrink when we feel big. We perform for whoever's listening. Your voice is a live broadcast of your insecurity, but a status-neutral voice doesn't advertise rank. It doesn't apologize for existing. When these people disagree with you, they don't soften it with humor or hedging. When they admit they don't know something, there's no padding, no credential dropping. This makes them seem secure, which makes people want to follow them. It also makes them nearly impossible to dismiss or dominate because there's no status anxiety to exploit. You can't make them flinch by challenging them because they're not performing. The trick itself is simple but brutal. Speak as though the person in front of you has no power over how you feel about yourself. Not arrogant, not indifferent, just unhooked. If you listen to yourself in conversation this week, you'll hear how much of your tone is a negotiation with the other person's opinion of you. The ones who stop negotiating become the ones nobody can quite read, refusing the frame contest. Someone corners you with a question that has only bad answers. Tell them you're upset and you're defensive. Say nothing and you're cold or guilty. Push back and you're difficult. They've drawn the circle and put you inside it. This is a frame, and the moment you fight within it, you've lost because they picked the battlefield. The real trap isn't the frame itself, but stepping into the contest about it at all. Here's what actually works. You don't answer the hidden question. You name the frame itself. Instead of defending against accusations wrapped in friendly tone, you pause and say, I notice you're asking this in a way that doesn't leave room for my actual answer, or simpler. That's not quite what's happening. You're not being evasive. You're refusing to play the game on their board. The unreadable people around you don't do this perfectly. They just do it consistently. They don't argue about whether they're upset when someone tries to trap them with it. They don't perform innocence. They step sideways. What makes this hard is that it feels rude the first time you try it, especially if you've spent years answering loaded questions as proof of your good intentions. But watch what happens. When you refuse to fight inside the frame, the person either has to name what they actually want or walk away. Either way, you've stopped being a readable puppet. You become someone who decides which games are worth playing, and the moment you stop playing is the moment they lose their grip on you. The unanswerable question. Someone leans in and asks, "Don't you think that's a bit unfair?" Or, "Why are you being so defensive?" And your stomach tightens because you already sense it. No matter which way you move, the door closes. Say yes and you admit wrongdoing. Say no and you sound like you're denying reality. Try to explain the nuance and they cut you off with, "So you admit it." You're pinned before you even knew the game was live. What makes this lethal is that your brain hates unresolved tension. When faced with a question engineered to have no clean exit, you scramble, you over-explain, you contradict yourself mid-thought, your voice cracks, you look evasive, guilty, uncertain, everything the asker wanted. They sit back and watch you demolish your own credibility while an audience watches. Smart manipulators use unanswerable questions like puzzle boxes with no solution. The real payoff isn't getting an answer. It's the chaos they triggered just by asking. Your panic does their work. The defense sounds almost too simple once you see it. Recognize the shape first. When someone asks you something where every possible answer funnels downward into a trap, stop moving. Don't scramble for a response that pleases them. Name it instead. That question doesn't have an honest answer, does it? Or even plainer, I'm not going to play this game. Most people back off immediately because you've stolen their leverage and called them visible. The ones who push harder anyway, they wanted the chaos more than they wanted a real conversation. And that single fact tells you exactly where to stand with them from that moment forward. Terminal statements. Listen to how people end arguments, not what they fight about, how they close the door. The person who gets to speak last often plants a statement so absolute, so final sounding, that it kills the conversation dead. That is the terminal statement, and it is a precision instrument disguised as frustration. You have probably thrown one yourself. This is who I am, or I'm done, or that's just how you are. The magic trick is that it sounds like a conclusion when it is actually a weapon. It stops the other person from responding because to argue against a terminal statement feels like arguing against a fact about existence itself. And here's where it gets sharp. You deploy these most when you are losing the actual argument. Your hand is weak, so you flip the table and declare the game over. I don't care anymore. You always do this. Nothing I say matters to you anyway. Each one inoculates you against further debate because what is there left to say to someone who has just announced they are done caring or that patterns are unchangeable? The other person sits there holding words that suddenly feel pointless. Over time, relationships develop a graveyard of these statements. Little graveyards where conversations went to die. The real skill, the one that keeps people close, is noticing when you are about to plant one. Feel the urge to end it? That is usually the moment to ask one more question instead. Stay open just a beat longer than feels safe. That is where real power actually lives. Ending on your beat. There's a conversation happening right now where someone is waiting for you to stop talking. Not because they're bored, because they've already decided what they think and they want their turn. The moment you sense that shift, most people panic and keep going, filling the silence with more words, more justification, more proof. That's when you lose control. Ending on your beat means you stop while you still have momentum, before the other person's impatience starts writing the ending for you. It's a small redirect with enormous ripple effects. When you leave space, you force the other person to either ask a question or fill the void themselves. If they ask, they're now invested in the answer. If they fill the void, they're revealing what they actually wanted to say. Either way, you've shifted from defending to leading. The person who ends the sentence controls the exit. The person who ends the conversation controls the memory. Notice how often you keep talking because you're anxious about how your words landed, not because you have more to say. That anxiety is the leak. The trick is to develop a physical tell, a slight breath, a pause, sometimes even a slow blink. That signals you're finished. Not that you're waiting for permission to continue. This trains people to respond to you, not to interrupt you. In negotiations, in first dates, in arguments with someone who matters. The person who can sit comfortably in silence while the other person scrambles to fill it has already won the game. Stop while you're winning. Let them catch up. The unreadable exit. Watch someone leave a conversation without actually leaving, and you've spotted one of the sharpest survival moves in human behavior. You stay in the room, nod at the right moments, maybe even laugh, but you've already gone. Your mind is somewhere else. Your investment has evaporated. The other person is still talking to the version of you that was present 5 minutes ago, and they rarely notice the swap. This is the unreadable exit, not a dramatic storm out, but a kind of social invisibility that happens while you're standing right there. The trick is that it leaves almost no trace. No one can accuse you of leaving because technically you never did. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't make a scene. You just checked out. And because most people are too wrapped up in their own need to be heard, they often don't register the shift until much later, if at all. By then, you've had hours or days to establish a new emotional baseline, and they're left piecing together a conversation that already ended in your head. What makes it truly unreadable is the ambiguity. They can't name what went wrong because nothing visibly broke. You just stopped being there. The other person second guesses themselves, wonders if they imagined the shift, or assumes they did something to deserve the distance. Meanwhile, you're already operating from a completely different set of assumptions about the relationship, and they're still trying to fix something they can't quite see. That gap between your internal exit and their awareness of it is where the real power lives. Goodbye without data. Someone leaves your life completely. No forwarding address, no way to reach them, no mutual friends feeding you scraps of information. What you're left with is the ghost of interpretation, and it hollows you out in a very specific way because your brain refuses to stop working. You invent reasons for the silence. You construct their thoughts about you, play out conversations that never happened, and each invented scene feels true because you have zero counter evidence to challenge it. That absence of data becomes the richest soil for the darkest stories you know how to tell yourself. Ambiguity is genuinely intolerable to the human mind. When someone vanishes without explanation, your mind doesn't pause or accept the mystery. It accelerates, spinning into overdrive to fill the void with emotionally resonant possibilities. Rejection, boredom, betrayal, shame, all of these feel more real than the empty space they're meant to fill because at least they're coherent, at least they make sense. And in the absence of facts, what feels true becomes true inside your own narrative. People who understand this leverage it deliberately. They know that no explanation is louder than a bad one, so they offer you nothing and let your own mind become the instrument of your suffering. The person is gone, but the damage stays because you're still in conversation with the version you created when they went silent. Breaking that loop requires something harder than getting answers. It requires accepting that some silences will never be explained and learning to sit with that discomfort until it stops recruiting your imagination to fill the dark. Attention as currency. Watch someone's eyes when you interrupt their phone. That flash of irritation, that micro twitch. You've just stolen something they were about to spend, not money, attention. And unlike cash, attention comes from a finite well each day, which means whoever controls where it flows holds real power over your mood, decisions, and sense of self. The person who can hold your gaze longest, make you turn your head first, win the conversation's momentum, they're not just better at talking, they're better at currency exchange. Consider how a skilled manipulator operates. They don't argue harder or talk louder. They make you want to look at them. They ask questions that make you lean in. They create little gaps of uncertainty that your attention can't help but fill. Your brain is built to notice threat and novelty, so if someone strings together urgency, a whispered confidence, a promise of insider knowledge, or a shared secret, your attention moves toward them like a plant toward light. You stop scrolling. You miss your exit. You forget what you were doing. Here's where the real leverage lives. Once someone maps how your attention moves, they can predict which levers work. They know if you're drawn to flattery or challenge, status or belonging, curiosity or fear. They'll deploy exactly that lever, and you'll feel like you chose it. The next time you feel that pull to focus on someone or something, pause first. Ask yourself, did I choose this, or did someone engineer it to be irresistible? That tiny moment of awareness is often the only real defense against someone who learned to read your attention like a map. Intermittent warmth. There's a person in your life who's cold one week, affectionate the next, and you've trained yourself to read every mood shift like a stock ticker. When they're distant, you scramble. When they're kind, you feel relief flood through you, almost like you've won something you didn't know you were competing for. That oscillation hooks harder than consistent coldness ever could. Psychologists call it intermittent reinforcement, and slot machines were built on this exact principle. Pull the lever not knowing if this time is the one, and you'll stand there all night. An unpredictable partner, a boss who praises you erratically, a parent whose approval swings like a door in wind, they all create the same neurological cocktail of hope mixed with uncertainty. Your brain floods with dopamine not when you receive warmth, but when you're hunting for it. You become hypervigilant, studying their face, their tone, their patterns, trying to predict what unlocks the next moment of connection. The invisible cost creeps in quietly. You stop trusting your own sense of what you deserve. The warmth stops feeling like a gift and becomes a metric of your worth. The cold stretches don't feel like their problem. They feel like yours to solve. People who use intermittent warmth don't do it by accident. They do it because it works. It keeps you focused, off balance, and grateful when the sun comes out. If someone treats you this way, ask yourself something honest. Am I drawn to who they actually are, or am I addicted to the unpredictability itself? That question doesn't just change how you see them, it changes whether you stay. Withholding without punishing. You notice your partner's mood shift when you stop texting back as quickly as you used to. Nothing harsh was said, no argument happened, you simply delayed, and suddenly they're wondering what they did wrong, reaching out more, adjusting their behavior without you ever having to ask. That's the architecture of withholding without punishing. And it's far more effective than any dramatic ultimatum because it operates below the threshold of resentment. The person feels the absence, not the blow. They interpret it as loss rather than rejection, which triggers something deeper, a need to restore what was taken. You're not cruel, you're just less available. That distinction matters enormously because it lets you deny intent. If they bring it up, you can genuinely say you've been busy, distracted, focused on yourself. You're not lying, technically. You're just organizing your life in ways that make them orbit closer. What makes this subtle is that it doesn't require secrecy or calculated scheming. It just requires presence when you choose it and absence when you don't. The person on the receiving end rewires their entire expectations around your availability. They learn that attentiveness isn't guaranteed, it has to be earned. And once that lesson sets in, you've created a dynamic where they're always slightly unsure, always slightly trying. Real boundaries are transparent and honest. This isn't. It's invisible influence wrapped in what looks like self-care and independence. And that's exactly why it works so reliably, so quietly, under the radar. The person feels it in their bones before they can ever name it. Praise scarcity effects. Your boss almost never compliments you. Then one afternoon, she says your work was solid, and you replay it in your head for weeks. Compare that to a manager who praises everything and somehow none of it sticks. Your nervous system isn't measuring the actual words, it's measuring signal against noise. A rare compliment from someone stingy with approval hits harder because scarcity makes it credible. Your brain does the math. If she almost never praises and she just praised me, then I must have actually done something worth noticing. Flood people with approval like Halloween candy, and the whole system collapses. They stop trusting it. They start wondering what you want, what you're hiding, or whether you're just too easy to fool. This is why managers who ration praise wield more influence than the cheerleaders. One moment of acknowledgement from a skeptic lands like a stone in still water. You ripple for days, but here's where it gets sharp. Once you see the mechanism, you can weaponize it. Become the person who rarely compliments. When you finally do, people will tie themselves in knots trying to earn another hit. They'll work harder, show up earlier, chase your approval like you're the only voice that matters. You don't even have to be right about them. You just have to be quiet and let scarcity do the work. The person who seems hardest to impress often becomes the most persuasive because everyone's watching for the crack that signals they might be seen. But the cliff arrives fast. The moment people catch on that you're rationing praise on purpose, the spell breaks and you just look calculated. The real power lives in the silence, never in the confession, the compliment vacuum. There's a particular kind of hunger that lives inside people who rarely heard they were good at anything. Watch someone who grew up without much praise, and you'll notice something sharp happens when you finally give it to them. They don't just accept it, they almost disappear into it. A single real compliment becomes oxygen, and if you keep offering it, if you're the one who notices what others miss, you've just made yourself indispensable in a way that has nothing to do with love and everything to do with need. The compliment vacuum is when someone is so starved for acknowledgement that they'll do almost anything to stay near the person who gives it. They'll rearrange their schedule, overlook your flaws, forgive things they shouldn't, all because you filled a hole that's been empty since childhood. You're not necessarily manipulating them on purpose. You're just noticing them, saying the thing nobody else bothered to say. But here's where it gets dark. Once they're orbiting around your approval, you have leverage you never asked for. The threat of withdrawal becomes currency. A brief silence where they expected a compliment, a casual comment that their effort wasn't quite enough. Suddenly, they're working twice as hard for the same reward, chasing validation like it's the only thing keeping them steady. The real tragedy is that it rarely builds self-worth. It just transfers the hunger from their family to you, and they never even notice the cage they've walked into willingly. And the person giving the compliments, they often don't realize they're holding the leash until the dynamic has calcified into something neither of them can quite name. Text latency shaping. You send a message and watch the typing indicator. 3 dots, then nothing for 40 seconds. Your stomach tightens. What changed in that gap? The person didn't vanish, the message didn't get lost, but your mind already rewrote the story. You imagined annoyance, distance, a shift in how they feel. The silence became proof of something. That gap between send and reply is latency shaping, and it works because we are creatures who fill empty space with narrative. When someone responds instantly, you feel seen. When they delay, you feel considered or rejected, depending on the person and the weight you carry. The genius of this is that you can deploy it without saying a word. A strategic pause creates emotional texture that a quick response erases completely. Someone who always replies immediately reads as eager or transparent, maybe desperate. Someone who waits reads as thoughtful, busy, unbothered, and crucially, you project the meaning onto the silence. They didn't have to say anything complicated. You did the work for them, filling the gap with your own fears and hopes. This is how people become hard to read, not through mystery, but through rhythm, through the simple architecture of when they show up. The timing of your responses, whether you match someone's pace, deliberately lag, or vanish at key moments, shapes how much power they give you. They are left guessing about the gap, which means they are thinking about you. Thinking about someone is the first step toward investing in them, toward caring what happens next. If you want to seem less available, more selective, harder to predict, control the texture of your absence. Punctuation as leakage. Look at a text conversation over a few months between you and someone you care about. Count the exclamation marks in the early messages, then count them now. That shift in punctuation, that invisible change, is you broadcasting your emotional state without knowing anyone's reading for it. Most people think punctuation is neutral, mechanical, dead. It isn't. It's a live wire to your internal weather, and it signals when you're too distracted to edit yourself. The shift happens slowly, so nobody notices the moment it changes. An exclamation mark costs energy. It signals presence, engagement, brightness. When you drop from 3 per message to 0, you're not being more mature or professional. You're showing strain. The person reading it feels the difference before they can name it. They might think you're angry. You might just be exhausted. Here's where it gets darker. People who study you will track this. They'll notice when your punctuation tightens. They'll see the moment you stop using your habitual phrases or abbreviations. They clock the shift from casual commas to rigid periods. It's not foolproof, but it's readable. A screenshot from when you were in love looks completely different from one taken during deception or resentment. The words can lie, punctuation almost never does. The trick isn't to fake enthusiasm with extra marks that reads false instantly, creates an uncanny valley nobody trusts. It's to notice what your natural punctuation reveals about who you are on different days, in different moods, under different pressures. That awareness itself becomes a form of control, and control is what separates the readable from the impossible. Emoji tells suppression. You're typing a message to someone you're upset with, and your thumb hovers over the emoji keyboard. A laughing face, a thumbs up, something warm. You add it anyway, even though inside you're not laughing at all, you're furious. What just happened is called a tell suppression, and emojis have made it almost invisible. Your face, if that person were in the room, would betray you. Your jaw would tighten, your eyes would narrow, but text doesn't have a face, so you borrowed one and it lied on your behalf. What's clever about this is that the emoji feels authentic to the receiver. They see the warm symbol, they trust it, and your anger gets buried under a digital smile that you controlled completely. It's a mask with plausible deniability built in. Nobody can accuse you of being upset when you sent a thumbs up, right? The deeper trap is that you can do this thousands of times without consequence. In a face-to-face conversation, holding anger while smiling feels exhausting. Your body rebels. But behind a screen, the contradiction costs you nothing, so the habit calcifies. You become someone who communicates the opposite of what they feel, and over time, the people closest to you stop trusting the words at all. They learned long ago to ignore your emojis and read between the lines instead. If you want to actually be read, try this. Send a message without the softening symbol. Let the real tone sit there. It will feel naked and dangerous at first. That discomfort is the price of being honest, and it's also the price of being believed. Read receipts and power. Watch what happens the moment a text turns from delivered to read. Your stomach shifts. They saw it. They're choosing not to answer. That tiny blue check mark has collapsed the gap between I didn't get your message and I read your message and decided you weren't worth a response right now. Before, you had plausible dread. Now you have proof, and that proof becomes the story you tell yourself for hours. This is pure asymmetric power. Whoever responds slower controls the emotional temperature. Whoever waits longer signals they have better things to do, less need for this connection, more leverage. Everyone knows it, so people perform elaborate dances. Disable read receipts to hide their availability, craft replies that take hours to seem casual, or ghost strategically because the silence itself is a statement. The read receipt made visibility the weapon And now we're all locked in a game nobody agreed to play. The trick is recognizing you've handed your emotional state to a feature designed by someone who doesn't know you exist. You're reading absence as rejection because the technology trained you to see it that way. Before read receipts, you'd assume they were busy. Now you assume they're choosing to ignore you. And that story spirals with each passing minute. If you find yourself locked on that blue check mark, try turning off read receipts, not because it makes you mysterious, but because you deserve to stop weaponizing your own availability against yourself. The real power move isn't the silence. It's the freedom to be indifferent to whether anyone knows you're ignoring them. The curated dull profile. There's a person at every office who seems almost aggressively ordinary. Beige sweater, safe jokes, a LinkedIn photo that could be a stock image. You notice them precisely because they're so easy to forget. That's not accident. That's strategy. One of the smartest moves in social engineering is to become boring enough that people stop looking. When your digital footprint reads like a tax return, when your social media contains nothing but mild observations and generic updates, you've created a kind of invisibility cloak. Predatory people, con artists, and those with something to hide do this deliberately. They strip their profile of anything memorable, any hook that might make you dig deeper. A personality is a fingerprint. Make yourself texture-free and you're harder to identify, trace, or understand. But here's where it works on you too. If you're reading this and thinking, maybe I should just share less, stay quiet, blend in, understand what you're actually trading. Dullness becomes a prison eventually. The person performing blandness every day starts to believe it about themselves. You flatten your own edges because you're afraid of judgment, afraid of standing out, afraid of giving anything away. Over months or years, that performance hardens into identity. You become the very thing you performed. The subtle dark side isn't just that bland people are harder to read, it's that performing blankness teaches you to stop wanting to be read at all. You disappear not because you're protecting yourself, but because hiding becomes easier than being seen. Know the difference between privacy and erasure. One is a boundary, the other is a slow fade. Social media as disinformation. You scroll past a video that makes your chest tight, a supposed quote from someone you distrust, a trend that feels like proof of something you already believed. Your finger hovers, share or don't. By the time you wonder if it's real, the algorithm has already learned what hooks you, and it will serve you more of it. That's not a glitch. That's the business model. Social media doesn't exist to inform you. It exists to keep you scrolling, and outrage, fear, and tribal confirmation are the most effective currencies on the exchange. A study from MIT found that false information spreads 6 times faster than truth on Twitter, not because people are stupid, but because false claims hit harder emotionally. They trigger surprise, anger, disgust. Your brain remembers the feeling, not the fact check that came later, and the platform profits either way. What darkens this picture is the speed and scale. A misquote can reach millions before the original source even knows. By the time corrections surface, you've already integrated the false version into your worldview. Corrections actually make false beliefs stick harder, a phenomenon called the backfire effect. You feel attacked when contradicted, so you defend the lie more fiercely. The people profiting know this. They design every notification, every algorithmic choice to maximize engagement, not accuracy. The real trick isn't that social media lies to you directly. It amplifies whatever lie you're already half willing to believe. then weaponizes your outrage to sell advertising. The next time something makes you certain and furious all at once, pause. That's often the taste of a perfectly engineered hook. Digital footprint pruning. You've already been profiled. That tweet from 8 years ago, the Instagram like you forgot you gave, the search history you erased from your own memory, someone has it. Not because you're paranoid, but because digital systems are designed to collect, correlate, and sell the story of who you are. The dark trick isn't just that your data exists, it's that you can't see the composite picture they've built from it, the coherent narrative they've stitched together from your fragments. So here's what the really sharp people do. They prune deliberately, not obsessively deleting everything in a panic, but strategically removing the signal noise patterns that digital systems use to predict your behavior and emotional weak points. Delete the old photos that cluster around a certain location you've since moved from. Purge the browser history that shows interest in something you experimented with once but no longer pursue. Remove yourself from people search databases. Adjust privacy settings not to hide, but to force third parties to work harder for less reliable data. The psychological angle here is subtle. It's not about being invisible, it's about being deliberately illegible. When your digital footprint becomes a mess of contradictory signals, algorithms struggle to pin you down and classify you neatly. You stop being a high-confidence target for micro-targeting, manipulation, and behavioral prediction. The people who do this understand something crucial. Data about you has power only when it tells a coherent story. By introducing strategic noise into that narrative, you make yourself harder to influence, harder to anticipate, harder to manipulate. It's not paranoia, it's digital self-defense, and it works because consistency is what predicts you. Third-party leakage control. Your friend sits across from you and tells you something soft, a fear, an embarrassment, a secret they don't want spread. You nod, you listen, you swear you'll keep it locked. But 2 days later, you mention it to your partner. Not as gossip, you tell yourself, just context, just explaining why they seemed off. And your partner mentions it to their friend who mentions it to someone else, and suddenly the thing that was supposed to stay between two people is floating through a room of 12. This is third-party leakage control, and it's the invisible knife that makes people suspicious of what you already know because they can't track how you know it. When someone tells you something in confidence, they're not just sharing with you, they're unconsciously testing how trustworthy you are with their entire inner life. But here's what trips most people up. You don't feel like you're breaking trust when you mention it in a new context. It feels like you're just talking, natural, necessary for understanding. The damage happens in the gap between your intention and their discovery. They find out you told, and suddenly you've become someone who leaks. Not maliciously maybe, but consistently enough that it matters. That changes how much they reveal to you next time. The unreadable move: never mention what someone told you in confidence to anyone else, even softly, even to explain yourself. Keep the circle exactly as it was. Even one extra person is one too many. That restraint signals something rare. You understand that some things aren't yours to redistribute, even accidentally. People notice that kind of silence more than they notice anything you say. Friend network as vulnerability. Watch who someone sits next to at a table, and you're watching their operating manual unfold. Your friends are a mirror you trust, which makes them something far more dangerous. A blueprint. Someone skilled at reading people doesn't need to follow you around. They just need to study who you choose, what you tell them, and how you treat them when you think nobody else is looking. Your inner circle is essentially a cheat sheet of your values, your fears, and your patterns, written in the language of human connection. The person you call at 3 in the morning tells a story about what breaks you. The friend you're most sarcastic with reveals what you're most defensive about. The one you confide in about money, family, or shame is showing someone exactly where your pressure points live. And here's what nobody wants to admit. The people closest to you know your tells better than you do. They see when you're lying before your mouth moves. They know which compliments land because they know which wounds still bleed. So if someone is skilled at remembering small details, at noticing patterns, at reading rooms, they can map your entire emotional terrain just by studying your friendships. They'll notice who you gravitate toward in groups, who you avoid after conflict, whose opinion shifts your mood like a wind change. Your friend network isn't just your support system, it's your operating manual, printed in plain text and handed to anyone willing to pay attention. The defense isn't isolation, it's knowing which stories are safe to tell and to whom, and why. That distinction matters more than feeling like you can trust everyone equally. Gossip Firewall. Watch what happens when someone leans in with a secret about another person. Most people feel that small rush of importance, a sense of being trusted, picked from the crowd. Your nervous system registers it as belonging, so you lean in too, nod, add your own observation. In that moment, you've traded your neutrality for social glue, which means the people telling this story now know something crucial about you. What you think of the absent person, where your loyalty sits, how you feel when nobody's watching. They don't forget. Nobody does. Weeks later, when that story gets back to the person it was about, and it always does, they know exactly how you talk about them when they're gone. You've painted a target on your own back without realizing it. The firewall isn't about refusing to gossip out of moral superiority that makes people distrust you faster. It's subtler and far more effective. When someone brings you a story, you acknowledge it neutrally. That sounds complicated, or I haven't seen that myself. You don't deny it happened. You don't preach. You don't moralize. You just don't amplify. You don't add your voice to the chorus. Within a few months, people stop testing you with secrets. They start trusting you instead, not because you're virtuous, but because you're genuinely safe. Safety is the rarest currency in most groups. People will tell you things, real things, deep things, because you've proven you're not a broadcast system or a threat. You hold information without broadcasting it, and in a world where everyone is mining everyone else for ammunition, that makes you genuinely powerful.